Hello everybody. Hopefully I am coming through okay. So, today's the day. The House Committee on Financial Services investigating the collapse of FTX. It's going to be a very interesting hearing. I'm very intrigued to hear what John Ray has to say. It looks like we're not going to have SBF with us today because he's been arrested. But what we do have is SBF's testimony. I'm going to pull this up now. It's just been released by Forbes. I know we're covering it as well, but it's still going through editorial. And some really interesting things in here. Essentially, he's arguing that the liquidators have colluded to force the bankruptcy proceedings. If we scroll down here, he's done a lot of his, I don't have all the data, I can't say exactly what went on sort of thing. But if we get down to, where is it? Chapter 11, I think this is it. Here you go. At roughly 4:30 a.m. on the 10th of November, against my better judgment, I clicked on a DocuSign link that would nominate John Ray as the CEO of various entities. Less than 10 minutes later, I received potential funding offers for billions of dollars to help make customers whole. A few minutes thereafter, I instructed my counsel to rescind the document. It had become clear to me that that was not the best way forward. My counsel informed me in a few minutes later that it was too late to rescind it and that Sullivan and Cromwell lawyers were submitting it on my behalf, despite my instruction not to. Roughly 6 hours later, more than ample time to change course, Sullivan and Cromwell filed the document with the court against my express wishes and stated orders. After that, John Ray filed for Chapter 11 for all entities, including a fully solvent US entity, FTX US. John Ray is famous primarily for his work with Enron bankruptcy estate. Sullivan and Cromwell recommended John Ray to manage the FTX bankruptcy. In the Enron bankruptcy, law firms including Sullivan and Cromwell were paid roughly $700 million in fees. So to summarize, that's my alarm for the hearing. To summarise, to the best of my knowledge, when Enron went through Chapter 11 process, John Ray and SEC were both lawyers and or administrators for the estate, which paid out roughly $700 million in legal fees. Then when FTX crashed, an ex-SNC partner chose SNC to represent FTX. SNC pressured me to file Chapter 11 documents and filed the documents despite my instruction not to. Essentially, he's claiming here that he didn't want to file the bankruptcy. He had offers to make customers whole, and yet the bankruptcy still went through. And arguably, he's alluding to the fact that Sullivan and Cromwell are doing this in order to get a big payday. It's big accusations, Sam. Big accusations. I don't know. Anyone in chat got any thoughts on that? It's very interesting. It's hard to know what's true and what's not at this point. Really is. I mean, when you read through all of this, it's quite coherent. He claims that his personal accounts have been locked out from him. Basically, he's got no access to anything. But then, interestingly, he says, I don't have access to anything, even my personal emails. But then also says that he's got information that the liquidators and the bankruptcy team with John Ray would find useful. So I'm not sure how he has also nothing and the smoking gun special information that would change the whole thing. Like either you have nothing or you are like integral to the case. He seems to be a little bit incoherent here, but it makes for a fascinating read, and I am very disappointed that we are not going to get to see Sam today, because obviously he's in custody. And I think today was the first time in history I've ever agreed with something that Peter Schiff has said. He tweeted today, let me find the tweet. From a tactical perspective, I don't understand why the US government didn't wait until SBF testified under oath before Congress tomorrow before charging him with a crime. Prosecutors actually did SBF a favor by saving him from himself. I mean, yeah, like I get that. Why not arrest him directly after he's given his testimony? I mean, he's already filed it, so we have it, I guess. But surely there was a chance for the Senate to actually ask him questions and get some sort of further insight beyond this. It all seems very cloak and dagger and very bizarre to say the least, especially when here this whole testimony basically says, I was trying to help customers out. I fucked up, which he said. I think that's the beautiful part. Like the start of this is just glorious. I would like to start by formally stating under oath, I fucked up. I mean, what a Chad. What a Chad. I mean, that's yeah. That's crypto bro at the highest level. It really is. I'm just gonna skip to make sure nothing started yet. No, nothing started on this yet. Yeah, I mean, he says that he's lost everything. He said last time he checked, he's got 100 grand in his bank account. So he's not trying to go, woe is me. He's saying I'm lucky. I've still got a living family and food on my plate. He then went on to say, yeah, the Chapter 11 filing wasn't correct. He was essentially coerced into it. He tried to back out. He had secured funding to make customers whole. He's reiterated again, which I do kind of agree with, that there's no reason why FTX US should be under the bankruptcy filing, given that they weren't insolvent at the time of the bankruptcy. That makes a lot of sense. And then, yeah, he tries to go into as much detail as possible as to kind of what happened. He really does throw Alameda under the bus again, saying that essentially they were 90% down and that he made a big mistake in not checking their margin account, and that margin account went up to about 8 billion without him checking, which is really hard to believe that he didn't know that. And yeah, so he puts it all onto Alameda. Alongside Binance, there's a big part here where he basically says a lot of this was a PR campaign from CZ and Binance to go after FTX and take them out as a competitor. That's fascinating. And yeah, then he goes into this whole bit around the Chapter 11 and the fact that he was coerced into it, and alluding to, I mean, it's explicitly saying that well, here we go. Bahamas Attorney General Ryan Pinder said it is possible that the prospect of multi-million-dollar legal and consultancy fees is driving both the Chapter 11's team's legal strategy and the intemerate statements. I mean, he then added a screenshot here from Ryan Miller saying, I need to wire Sulcrom 4 million to make sure we're all represented. Can we do that? So, yeah, needless to say, Solomon Cromwell have not made sure that we are all represented through this. They have, however, done a good job of making sure that they were wired $4 million. Spicy. So we've still got about 9 minutes before we start. An interesting scoop that we do have that I would just like to quickly go through while we're waiting for the hearing to start is this. Binance may have billions in stashed secret reserves not disclosed to public. So a source that I was speaking to today, who wishes to remain anonymous, but from my point of view is a very reliable entity with other reliable sources where this information has come from, including ex-Binance employees, stating that in the early days of Binance, most of the funds were going directly to CZ, which means that there are reserves behind the reserves. Essentially, what this article goes on to say is that potentially CZ is richer than Binance, and that Binance are only revealing what they have to reveal with their proof of reserves, and that actually there's potentially there you go, let's read this. Binance is safe since the exchange's CZ has disclosed maybe only half or a fraction of what he actually owns. So this is alluding to the fact that CZ could have more money than Binance, or at least maybe as much, and essentially the exchange is more than BAT if we take CZ's holdings into account. Very interesting. It also wanted to say Binance is a very centralized and more centralized than any other exchange in the world right now due to the fact of the way that the funding works, and the equity was rolled over from CZ's previous ventures. And that the early investors were paid out in BNB tokens and exited a while back. Thus, CZ is under no pressure from these investments, unlike SBF at FTX, obviously with the FTT tokens and the Serum, etc. So yeah, Binance may be more than solvent. There's been obviously a lot of news recently saying whether the audit was legit, whether it actually did anything, and whether they really do have like additional liabilities. The source also said that CZ is very, very conservative in the way that he runs things, and therefore does view Binance as being quite a safe entity. And given all the talk recently of CZ potentially coming after FTX with a PR campaign and trying to push FUD, etc., it does seem fascinating that with everything that's going on with FTX right now, we're now starting to see stuff coming out kind of the other way. So whether is the arguments that there's some kind of FTX kind of subplot to try and go on the offensive against Binance. Don't know. Interesting. Anyone got any thoughts? Feel free to drop it in the chat and let's get talking. Let's have a look at BNB right now. Let's see what's happened because I know it dropped. Everything like crypto in general is kind of up right now. At least Bitcoin and Ethereum are really leading the charge. Okay, yeah. So we came back from. Let's go back to this one. We came back from about 260. So we are up. Good up 7% on this morning. When obviously we had the BUSD wobble, with the whole BUSD versus USDC fight again going on. Let's pull up BUSD. Here it is. I mean, it's back at $1. I mean, did it really even move? I mean, not really, not according to our data. It did. I think if we go on like Coin Market Cap, we can see a little bit more of a wobble, maybe. I mean, it's negligible, isn't it? I mean, yeah, it dropped and came back up again, but I mean, how many times has it done that on this data? I mean, yeah, it's trending below the line rather than above, but I mean, if you go back for this period of time, and it's done that plenty of times, like it's a fairly biggish move, similar to when FTX. I mean, the opposite. This is FTX. This is the interesting thing, like people getting off FTX and then going on to Binance with BUSD. So let's just refresh this, make sure that it hasn't started. Nope. Let's have a quick look at the USDD as well, because this was depegging yesterday. Oh wow, shumph. So, what's the volume that we're looking at today? Volume 120 million. Have we got a peak in volume? Not hugely. But obviously, one of the interesting things with this is Justin Sun this morning deposited, he removed, what is it, 100 million USDC from Coinbase, then deposited it onto Binance, and now he's withdrawn 100 million BUSD from Binance. I wonder whether he sold that into USDD, because I mean, 100 million would make up the majority, and it's up 69%. It'd make up a massive part of today's volume. So, there's an argument here you could potentially see. Like, this is not fact. This is just me talking about sort of potential situations here. Like, did Justin Tron kind of help himself and CZ in a couple of trades? USDC into BUSD, leave the USDC there so that they've got it for the withdrawals, which they were struggling with, pulled out the BUSD, then swapped that for USDD, and restored the peg. Because this is today, right? Yeah, look, so this is what's our data look like for USDD? There it is. Welcome to everyone joining the stream. We're going to be covering the hearing as soon as it starts. It's not quite started yet. Yeah, look at that. Boom. Massive rebound. Interesting. Very interesting. I mean, our data is showing it's still below the peg, but not by an absolute fortune. I'm just going to take a snip of this. So, who's excited for this hearing? I mean, C-SPAN stuff's never like the most exciting thing of all time, but I'm really interested to see what John Ray had to say, especially if he's read SBF's testimony, see whether he comes fighting back. Let's get some of our researchers on looking and see whether we can actually show some on-chain data to back up that potential theory. Pop that into our editorial channel so we can see what's what. Don't be shy. Feel free to say hi, anyone. Also, feel free to just lurk and listen in. Let's give this a refresh again. Let's see whether we're getting started yet. We should be starting in 1 minute, so we're getting ready to go. Looking forward to this. I think the John Ray statement did come out yesterday as well, actually. Let me have a quick look through that, because we do have... oh, look, there's us. There we are. How cool. Feel free to share this stream, guys and girls and pals. Twitter, Telegram, Discord, wherever. Anyone you think might be interested in hearing about what's going on today, feel free to spread the word. I'm going to do just that as well. Sorry, it's just my friends chatting about what's going on. One of my groups. I knew that would happen. Like, it'd always be sharing it in a weird way. Right, let's find John Ray's testimony. Here we go. Okay. SPF arrested. Ray's testimony listed 8 unacceptable management practices at the FTX group, included commingling of assets, absence of audited financial statements, or absence of independent governance, and a lack of personnel to handle financial risk and management. Hey, Christian, how you doing, buddy? One of our other journalists in the chat. How you doing, bud? So, did he write this? No, it's only this article. Ray also highlighted Alameda's role in the collapse. I mean, this is something that obviously SBF has alluded to as well. Alameda deployed funds to various third-party exchanges, which are inherently unsafe and further exacerbated the limited protections offered in certain foreign jurisdictions. One of the interesting things, Judgment Day for the crypto criminals. Well, I mean, one of them's already been arrested, and we're not going to hear from any potential criminals today because we're going to hear from John Ray. But we will hear what he thinks about Senor Bankman-Fried. Let's see if we started. Are we started? Come on, you're late. It's late. It's 2 minutes late. Scheduled for... Yeah. This is it. We're just not going yet. Let's get rid of this. Don't need this. FTX went on a $5 billion spending binge. Wow. Meanwhile, insiders also enjoyed special treatment, getting over $1 billion in personal loans. Yeah, well, the loans from FTX and Alameda have been well documented recently, including, unfortunately, some of the members from or the CEO of the block, which was devastating to hear. Obviously, being part of crypto media, it's not something that we like to see. But as far as I've seen, the editorial team at the block seem to have been siloed from the incident. I know there's a lot of great people that work over there. And I just hope they're able to increase their transparency and recover from this. I mean, you could argue that they're rivals to us, but obviously we don't wish anyone ill or anything of the sort. Have we started? Nope. Ray noted that efforts are ongoing to recover some of these missing funds, maximize value for customers and creditors, and repair FTX relationship with regulators worldwide. That goes completely against what SBF has said. SBF said that they are not cooperating with foreign jurisdictions to the point where even some employees could face jail time as a result of it. I'm not sure where in the document that was. I think it was fairly early on. So yeah, it seems like everyone's got a different argument for what's going on with this story, and it is really hard to believe anything that Sam says at this point. It really is. I think initially I was one of those in the camp that felt that he just made a mistake and he messed up. But the more and more it goes on, cause I just felt that there was something about his demeanor that didn't seem like he was a criminal mastermind. It seemed like have you seen that TV show How to Sell Drugs Online, which is kind of loosely based on the sort of Silk Road story? The guy the kid just kind of gets in deeper and deeper after making mistake after mistake after mistake, and then all of a sudden he's kind of in too deep. I kind of had a view that that was quite likely to be the case with SBF, that he just kept on messing up. And kind of then just got in too deep, and maybe there were some sort of investors behind him that were kind of leading the charge on it. But it's really hard to argue for that narrative anymore with everything that's gone on. It really is, because there's just too many mistakes. And how do you go from being the genius of crypto? How do you go from someone that's meant to be this like savant of the industry? I mean, he's an MIT grad and the such, to missing some really, really basic maths. It just doesn't seem viable to me. So it's hard. It really is. They are very late with starting this stream. It is going to start at some point, though. You'd like to hope. Let's have a quick look at what else is going on in the news while we are waiting. There you go, Christian, who's in the chat. Let's read his latest article that went out 10 minutes ago. CFTC suing FTX, SBF, and Alameda for commodities law violations. So the SEC released a statement around his arrest, and now the CFTC are going after him as well. So looks like they're going to be fighting over SBF, just like they're fighting over crypto and who should regulate it. Those two organizations do not seem to be able to agree with each other on anything. So U.S. Commodities Future Trading Commission is suing former FTX CEO Sam Bankman-Fried, FTX and Alameda for violating federal commodities law. Bloomberg reported that the regulator alleges in his Manhattan filing that SBF took loans of millions of dollars from Alameda and put money towards buying real estate. Yeah, we've just seen that. In addition, they claim ordered FTX executives to create features in the exchange code that allowed Alameda to have essentially unlimited line of credit to FTX. I mean, it's hard to argue that that part isn't true, given that Sam's already said that the margin level for Alameda was like $8 billion, and he wasn't aware that it got to that level. And it does just seem that they had this untapped amounts of margin that they could just pull on a whim. Yeah, I mean, yeah, one of my friends just messaged me like, where is Caroline in all of this? Well, interestingly, she was seen, was it in New York recently? She was spotted, and then there has been a whistleblower being listed as having coming forward with more information just before Sam was arrested. So, I mean, I don't know. There's obviously a narrative here where Caroline is just a pawn in all of this. That Sam is a criminal mastermind. He put Caroline in charge at Alameda, and now she's rolling on him in order to save herself. There's also a narrative where she's the one that messed up, and Sam is the potential innocent party in all of this. Well, innocent, and I think negligence is definitely a crime here, because he did have a fiducial duty to the exchange. But there's definitely an argument for that narrative. I think the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle of it all, but it is interesting how little attention Caroline's been getting from what's going on. She seems to have just gone underground, whereas Sam's coming out and chatting on Twitter Spaces every day and whatnot. Here we go. My biggest problem, so Angela says, my biggest problem with SBF is him lying about giving donations to Republicans through the dark web. SEC director is buddies with her dad. Yeah, but I mean, so Sam's dad, obviously, was a professor at Stanford. He's cancelled all his classes for next semester, so he's not going to be there next semester. Oh, it's starting shortly. We're getting somewhere. What Angela's also saying, don't forget him stealing our taxes from Ukraine and launder it back to high-powered Democrats. Yeah, I mean, in terms of his donations, what Sam said was that he was donating towards politicians that were focusing on pandemic responses for the future to try and stop the next pandemic, and that those donations were not related to sort of crypto, and he was just trying to use his money to stop pandemic. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But I mean, his narrative of saying that he wanted to try and send money to Republican candidates that he liked through backdoor channels. I mean, there's a logic in that. There's a lot of people in, say, the media industry and just general kind of public light that do support Republican parties through backdoor channels because of the perception that it's received in the media. I mean, whether any of that is true or not, did he just buy people off? Was he trying to buy off Gary Gensler? There's so many conspiracy theories with all this. I think the reality is we just don't know, and ultimately we just want to know what actually happened. And I think the thing that's really kind of screwing up all of this at the moment is, like from his transcript, is he's now thrown this spanner in the works of saying that making the new potential villain in the whole story, what's the name of the law firm again? Sullivan and Cromwell, saying that they kind of pushed him to do this, they're going to make a load of money out of it. I mean, he's obviously going to go for a scapegoat. Alameda's, he's got three, hasn't he? He's got Binance, he's got Alameda, and he's got Sullivan and Cromwell with John Ray involved with that as well, which is why I'm really interested to see if anyone asks John Ray about SBF's testimony, given that he's not given the testimony, but he did file it. Whether that now is admissible to talk about, I don't know. So, yeah. Hey, everyone else that's joining the chat. We are going to be getting started shortly. We're just waiting for this to go live. Let's have a quick refresh. It was meant to start at 3. It's obviously 1:15 already, so we're not in there. So we've got these new potential villains in this story, and like Sam saying, for anyone that wasn't here at the start, like Sam saying that he was pushed into the bankruptcy, and the most important part here is to say it was 4 a.m. in the morning, 4:30 in the morning, which against his better judgment, he clicked a DocuSign link to nominate John Ray as CEO. 10 minutes later, he got a potential funding offer of billions of dollars. I mean, reveal who that is then. Like, get that person to back you up. Like, if someone offered him billions of dollars to help make customers whole, and that was part of the solution, why are they not now standing up and saying, yes, I wanted to invest in FTX at that point. Even if they don't want to now, they could say, I've changed my mind, the landscape's changed, etc., etc. But I was willing to help make customers whole, and the bankruptcy should never have gone through. Surely that could help change proceedings, because the omnibus hearing for the bankruptcy filing is on the 16th, so we've got 3 days. And there's still time to file claims for that. So someone could file saying that they can make this go away. I mean, obviously it's not going to be as easy as that, but I mean, something could happen there. So he's basically, SBF is basically trying to make out like this is that the exchange was really struggling, but he found a solution. And right at the last minute, just after he clicked the button to say John Ray's now the CEO, someone offered him billions of dollars, probably via Telegram or something. And he's like, oh crap, I need to take it back. And like, no, you can't take it back. We're going through with this because we want all of our money. And then he also puts in this Binance part where he goes like full attack on CZ and Binance. Where's Binance's role? Binance's role here. So he basically said that they had an LOI with Binance, which prevented them from talking to other investors. And then Binance pulled out because, here we go, we started.
Who has been appointed CEO of FTX to oversee its bankruptcy.
Can you guys hear that? I can't
to testify before our committee for the first part of our investigation into the fall of FTX. I am hopeful that the arrest of Mr. Bankman-Fried, the founder and former CEO of FTX, means he will be held accountable for the fraud he has committed and the harm he has caused. He was scheduled to testify under oath before this committee today. Unfortunately, the timing of his arrest denies the public the opportunity to get the answers they deserve. Rest assured that this committee will not stop until we uncover the full truth behind the collapse of FTX. Just a few months ago, FTX was one of the largest cryptocurrency exchanges in the world, with a valuation of $32 billion in just 3 years since its founding. Today, FTX is bankrupt and possibly looted. FTX misused an approximately $10 billion in customer funds and owes creditors at least $3 billion. Today, as many as 1 million people, many of whom are here in the United States, are locked out of their FTX accounts and may recover only a fraction of their hard-earned investments, if any at all. But this failure is not just noteworthy for its size, but for the company's total disregard for standard business practices, governance, risk management, and criminal conduct. Mr. Ray, who also oversaw one of the largest corporate bankruptcies in United States history, Enron, declared that he had never
view on SBF
in
does
his
seem
career
to have
seen such,
switched.
I quote,
But I mean, so's everyone.
complete failure of corporate
I'm sure she would
controls
agree that she
and
was
such a
taken
complete
in by him.
absence of trustworthy financial information as occurred here, end of quote. I'm so deeply troubled to learn how common it was for Bankman-Fried and FTX employees to steal from the cookie jar of customer funds to finance their lavish lifestyles.
Or was it? I mean, yeah.
Today,
the amount
this
of
committee
stuff
will
that they've
dig
bought in the
deeper into
Bahamas.
Mr. Ray's findings with the hopes of piecing together the events that led to the collapse of FTX.
Oh, that is an interesting point. Political donations are subject to clawbacks under bankruptcy. So all the money that SBF has donated arguably could be clawed back from the Democrat Party, which are they solvent enough to give money back?
Away billions of dollars in customer assets that were inappropriately transferred from FTX. And importantly, we will hear how Mr. Ray and his team are trying to recover funds for customers by piecing together.
Don't give us a thumbs up in chat if the volume's okay.
Keeping, and by identifying potentially unlawful transfers to himself as well as his friends and family. Under my leadership over the past 4 years, this committee has closely focused on the growth and popularity of crypto precisely because of the many concerns that the failure of FTX has highlighted. Last year, I created a digital assets working group comprised of Democratic members of the committee with the goal of learning more about the underlying technologies, applications for finance,
I mean,
and
I'm
the
not a fan
risk
of the
they
Republicans, but
pose
why only a
to
Democrat
customers,
committee? Why not
consumers,
bipartisan?
and the economy. When the President's Working Group on Financial Markets urged Congress to safeguard the economy from stablecoin risk, I and Ranking Member McHenry jumped into action and continued to work on a bill with the members of this committee. The ongoing failures of crypto firms like Terra USD, Celsius, BlockFi, and most significantly, FTX and Alameda Research only serves to strengthen the importance for Congress
Did she mention Terra
and
there?
the
Because I feel
public
like
to
$60
understand
billion
the harm
is
caused
kind of a big deal,
to
but okay.
customers. What laws have been broken or flaunted, and how Congress and the regulators can prevent this from happening again. I want to say that I'm pleased that the committee's efforts have pushed enforcement agencies across the country to take greater action against bad actors who misuse.
Come on, we want to
customers'
hear
funds.
John Ray talk.
I also applaud the SEC for authorizing separate charges relating to Mr. Bankman-Fried, and I look forward to additional actions.
Do we
to
think
hold him
John Ray's going
accountable
to
and
go on the
make
attack against
customers
SBF? I
more
mean, we've gone through his
whole again.
testimony.
I yield back.
It does call
And I
out
now
John Ray
recognize the ranking
and
member of the
potential
committee, the
collusion
gentleman
with the
from North
lawyers.
Carolina, Mr. McHenry, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've heard everything but the truth. Tweets, DMs, and interviews are no substitute for the
Fellow
facts.
kids.
And that's why Chairwoman Waters and I worked together to get this hearing on the books, the first bipartisan hearing of this committee in the last 4 years. And we've worked together to invite 2 witnesses. One, Mr. Ray, is proven to be a reliable witness. The second, well, frankly, I look forward to getting his lies here on the record under oath.
So why wasn't he arrested
Nevertheless, the
this
arrest
evening?
of Sam
Why was he
Bankman-Fried
arrested last
is
night?
welcome news.
It doesn't make any sense.
But it still does not get at the bottom of what happened at FTX and why it happened. And
Anyone
who
any
else
theories as to
may be
why he was
responsible.
arrested last night, just
We need to
before this
understand
hearing?
the flow of funds
Like,
between FTX and
he was meant to be
Alameda
turning
Research
up
and
to
the
this.
130
He'd written a
related
statement
entities.
and sent it. His
We need to
testimony.
examine the actions of those who may have contributed to what has been called a, quote, complete failure of corporate controls, end quote. That quote comes from Mr. Ray, the newly appointed CEO. And we need answers for the U.S. platform customers stuck in limbo. But our work here, our work doesn't stop there. We have an obligation to do everything in our power to ensure this never happens again. But let's face it, there's an old saying, there's nothing new under the sun. And it's safe to assume that fraud and fraudsters have been around just as long as that phrase has been around.
Yeah, and that's the important thing to remember.
Bankman-Fried's
Like, pretty much
play is
everything that's
nothing
happened
new.
this year has
We've
got
seen it
nothing to
before.
do with crypto.
In the late 1800s, when
someone
the
mentioned in a
Union
podcast recently, it's a
Pacific
meat bag
purposefully
problem.
inflated
It's
the price of
human
railroad construction to line its executive
Right,
pockets.
no crypto product
Or in
failed
the
here, no blockchain
1900s,
product
when the
failed.
con man George
People
C.
failed.
Parker was arrested for illegally, quote-unquote, selling the Brooklyn Bridge, Madison Square Garden, and the Statue
Really?
of Liberty.
Don't you just hate
And in
it
the
how
2000s,
politicians
when
like,
it was
this is my
revealed
time to
Enron
shine, I
engaged
know
in
I'm going to
massive
get
corporate fraud
a
and
big,
corruption,
like, it's going to have the
sending
most views
shockwaves
of any of
throughout
these
the
hearings, oh
business
yes, I'm
world.
going to give a really nice big speech
There
and
are
show off
many
how eloquent I am.
comparisons you can
come
draw
on.
between each one of these pretenders
No one's
and the
here to listen
alleged
to you.
actions of Mr.
Like, I also
Bankman-Fried.
don't see how does this
It
help in
appears to
any
be
way.
the same
Him giving
old-school
his statement
fraud, just
doesn't
using
change the
new
facts. Like,
technology.
he's saying he wants to find out about
But
the
it's
lies and
important to
stuff.
note, and I think
Let's
it's
get
very
into actually
important to
talking
note.
to someone that
We
cares
still use
and
railroads.
knows.
We still buy and sell real estate, and we still rely on businesses to provide services. We have to separate out the bad actions of an individual from the good created by an industry and an innovation. So let me be clear.
Dave.
I believe in the promise of digital assets and those around the world building on blockchain technologies. And that's why I've worked and will continue to work to provide clear rules of the road for the digital asset
SBF was gonna skip
ecosystem
out.
here in the United
He
States.
said yesterday that he
And
wasn't
that's
going to
how we
attend the hearing
protect
on
American
Wednesday, but he
consumers
did
and
allude
investors
to
in this marketplace
being.
and allow innovation to
I mean,
occur
he sent his
here in the
testimony
United
for this.
States.
Whether he was just
I'll
planning to
finish
send
with
his
this.
testimony and not turn up.
We know the Securities Exchange Commission Chair Gensler's
No, I
regulation
don't
by
tend to find my
enforcement
love.
approach
I am happily married.
is not going to stop
Put
bad
the user
actors.
in time
Next
out.
year, I look forward to hearing from Mr. Gensler early and often. And we'll hear from him on how we can provide clarity on the application of our securities laws to trading platforms, which he has failed to do.
Too right.
The Financial Services Committee
Definitely.
has an
Calling
important
out
role
Gary
to play
Gensler there.
in this fact-finding
I do
mission,
not disagree with that.
which we will start today.
And say
And
if it,
continue
but I mean, this is the thing. Like
we
FTX
work
wasn't
towards a
regulated by the
legislative
SEC because it
outcome to
wasn't
prevent
open to U.S.
this
customers.
from happening again. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
We're gonna hear from John yet?
I want to welcome our
It's
witness
totally a
for
bot.
this hearing.
Like I think we got botted.
John
like,
J.
as the streams,
Gray
like
III,
the hearing
who is
started.
the Chief Executive Officer
happens.
of XTX Group. Without objection, your written statement will be made part of the record.
Here we go.
You will have 5 minutes to
This is
present
what
your
we're looking
oral
for.
testimony. You should be able to see a timer that will indicate how much time you have left. I would ask you to be mindful of the timer so that we can be respectful of everyone's time. Mr. Ray, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to present your oral testimony.
Chairwoman Waters, Ranking Member McHenry,
So this is the testimony that we've
members
already
of the
heard,
committee.
I believe.
thank you for your invitation to appear today. I truly appreciate your interest in this matter, and I
Well
hope
done.
my
Let's fight the
testimony
bots.
can be helpful to you as the committee continues its inquiry
He's a bit
into
quiet.
the
isn't he?
collapse of FTX and the efforts that are underway to help those who've been harmed. I accepted the position of Chief Executive Officer of FTX in the early morning hours of November 11. Immediately, it became clear to me that Chapter 11 was the best course available to preserve any remaining value of FTX. Therefore, my first act as CEO was to authorize the Chapter 11 filings. I've implemented a 5-part bankruptcy plan, which is detailed in my written statement. Our overarching objective is to maximize value for FTX customers and creditors so that we can mitigate to the greatest extent possible the harm suffered by so many. The FTX Group's collapse appears to stem from absolute concentration of control in the hands of a
Hopefully that
small
sounds
group
better now.
of grossly inexperienced and unsophisticated individuals who failed to implement virtually any of the systems or controls that are necessary for a company entrusted with other people's money or assets. Some of the unacceptable management practices we've identified so
Dave's a
far
legend.
include the use of
We've got something special. for
computer
them.
infrastructure that gave individuals in senior management access to systems that stored customer assets without security controls to prevent them from redirecting those assets. The storing of certain private keys to access hundreds of millions of dollars in crypto assets without effective security controls or encryption. The ability of Alameda to borrow funds held at FTX.com to be utilized for its own trading or investments without any effective limits
cameras in.
whatsoever. The commingling of assets, the lack of complete documentation for transactions involving nearly 500 separate investments made with FTX Group funds and assets.
I mean, there's no argument
absence
that
of
it was a
audited
complete
or reliable
fuck-up
financial
in terms of
statements.
organization. There's
The lack of
absolutely no
personnel in
argument there.
financial and risk management functions, and the absence of independent governance throughout the FTX Group. A fundamental challenge we face is that we're in many respects starting from near zero in terms of the corporate infrastructure and record keeping that one would expect in a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Still, in just over 4 weeks, we've instituted meaningful steps to gain command and control, and every week we gain a better understanding of what occurred and the path forward, all of which will be shared with interested parties and affected parties throughout the Chapter 11 processes. The scope of our investigation is truly enormous. It involves detailed tracing of money flows and asset transfers from the time of FTX's founding
You can both be blue.
and complex technological efforts to identify and trace crypto assets.
Get room, you two.
We're in the process of collecting and reviewing dozens of terabytes of documents and data, including billions of individual transactions. We're leveraging sophisticated technology and expertise to identify and trace additional transactions and assets. While many things are unknown at this stage, we're at a very preliminary stage, many questions remain we know the following. First, customer assets at FTX.com were commingled with assets from the Alameda trading platform. That much is clear.
Yep.
Second, Alameda used client funds to engage in margin trading.
Yeah, this is the bit
Which
that's
exposed
just
customer
unacceptable
funds to
regarded
massive losses.
above everything else. Like
Third,
if
the
you're
FTX group
spot
went on a
depositing
spending
on an
binge in
exchange, they shouldn't really do
2021,
anything with it.
2022, during which $5 billion was spent on a myriad of businesses and investments.
And even
many
if
of which
Alameda had
may only
this
be worth a
unlimited
fraction
credit, it
of
should
what was
only be
paid for them.
limited. It should be at least limited
Fourth,
to funds that were
loans and
legally
other
able to
payments
be
were made to
like,
insiders
sent
in
to them.
excess of $1.5 billion.
It basically
Fifth,
just
Alameda's business model as a market maker
paper
required funds
trading
to
on FTX. You deposit your
deployed
money,
to
they
various
then
third-party
send it
exchanges,
elsewhere, and then you
which
pay
were
the
inherently
trade,
unsafe,
try and withdraw, and
further
hope that you
exacerbated by
can.
the limited protections offered in certain of those foreign jurisdictions.
Well, is Coffeezilla
I
right
know
about?
the
He's right about a
resolution
lot
of
of
the
stuff.
Chapter 11 process,
all
as well as
honesty.
the investigation into the cause
Can
of
be
the
a little
FTX
bit
Group's collapse are of keen
hyperbolic at
interest
times,
to this committee
but
and to your
solid guy.
constituents.
If you haven't seen his interview
Although,
with
You
Lex
know, there are
Friedman,
many who
that's
need and
really
deserve
worth watching.
answers. There's
He was
customers,
really
there's
good on that.
creditors, there's investors, counterparties, employees, and regulators. We're positioning
I do
ourselves
find
to
it
provide
weird
each of these
that they allow them to
constituents
send the
with the
testimony
answers
ahead of
that they
time.
deserve.
It then gets published, and then they
Though a
read it
bankruptcy
out.
proceeding of this
It's like everyone's read
unprecedented
this
nature
already.
will take some time to run its
Well,
course.
not everyone, but
I'm committed to working as quickly as possible to investigate what happened, formulate conclusions, and hopefully inform the committee's work here. I should note that my ability to comment on certain of the matters today will be inherently limited by the state of FTX's records, ongoing bankruptcy proceedings, and of course, the numerous ongoing investigations by the
Yeah,
U.S.
Lexus
law
is
enforcement regulators. I look forward to answering your questions to the best of my
He's like-
ability.
he's like-
Thank you again
Lex is what
for
Joe
allowing me
Rogan wishes
to
he was.
present in front of this committee. Thank you.
Here we go. This is the bit we want.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ray,
Here we go.
it has been widely reported how FTX shifted customer funds held at the exchange to Alameda Research, which was a hedge fund owned almost entirely by Mr. Bankman-Fried. This allowed the firm to effectively gamble with customer money without their knowledge or consent. If FTX was registered as a securities exchange, several laws would have required the segregation of customer assets and prevented such clear conflicts of interest. Mr. Bankman-Fried also appears to have tried to hide the linkages between the exchange and his hedge fund. Have you seen evidence of such a cover-up? Have you seen evidence that there was any independent governance of Alameda separate and apart from that of the exchange?
Oh,
The operations of the XTF group were not
wasn't me.
segregated. It was really operated as one company.
it was operating as one company.
As a
So.
result, there's no distinction virtually between the operations of the company and who controlled those operations.
Well, Mr. Ray, another bankruptcy filing revealed that Mr. Bankman-Fried personally received a $1 billion loan from Alameda Research. In a meeting with committee staff, Mr. Bankman-Fried was unaware of the terms of the repayment, interest details, and could not confidently state who authorized the loan. He claimed that he reinvested this money into the exchange, but knowingly chose to have the loan issued to him rather than FTX to avoid directly connecting Alameda Research to FTX. Can you elaborate on any significant findings in connection with this loan?
Let's have a look. And
The-
so we said.
The loans that were given to Mr. Bankman-Fried were not just one loan, it was numerous loans, some of which were documented by individual promissory notes. There's no description of what the purpose of the loan was. In one instance, he signed both as the issuer of the loan as well as the
Oh,
recipient.
wow.
We have no.
I would like to
information at
loan
this
myself
time
$1 million.
as to what the purpose or the
Yes.
use of those funds were. And that is
Agreed.
part of our
He's
investigation.
literally just sat there talking to himself in a room. Hey,
Did
Mr.
you
Sam
find
Bankman-Fried, would you like $1
any
million?
business
Oh,
or
yes, I would. Thank you
operational
very much.
activities
What interest rate
that
could you
the
give me? 0%.
entities
Fantastic.
jointly
That's not a
engaged
problem
in
at all.
that you would consider inappropriate or detrimental to FTX? If so, could you give us an example?
Certainly, thank you. The operation of Alameda really depended, based on the way it was operated, for the use of customer funds. That's the major breakdown here. Funds from FTX.com, which was the exchange for
The interesting part with all
non-US
this is that
citizens.
why is
Those
FTX.US
funds were used
within all of
at
this? It's the
Alameda
only thing that's
to make
actually
investments
relevant
and other
to
disbursements.
US citizens. And all of this about FTX.com, they have all the funds from FTX.US. The SBF says
Did
those customers should be able to
FTX
be made whole.
have
Like before
sufficient
the bankruptcy
risk
proceedings,
management
it looked like
systems
they were not going to be
and
made
controls to
bankrupt.
appropriately
There were like
monitor
4
any
companies,
leverage the
including like Ledger
business
X was one of
took
them, that
on,
didn't go under the
and the interconnections it
bankruptcy in
had
Chapter
with
11.
businesses like
why
again,
do they have
Alameda.
that money? Why are they not
There were
giving
virtually no
those
internal
customers the money
controls
back
and
right
no
now?
separateness whatsoever.
Because this is the thing you've got to remember, everyone. He's the guy in charge of FTX's money right now. He's the one leading
With
the
that,
charge as to
I'm
what
going
happens. Obviously,
to,
there's certain regulations around Chapter 11 and what can and
call
can't
on
be
the
done.
gentleman from North
But
Carolina, Mr.
he could file a
McHenry,
motion to
who
release
is the ranking
the
member of the
FTX.US
committee.
funds to
You are now
US customers,
recognized for 5
which again
minutes.
Thank you, Madam
is
Chair.
what
Mr. Ray, thank
committee
you for your
should actually be
testimony.
caring about. They've not mentioned
We
that once.
had your predecessor, Mr. Sam Bankman-Fried, before this committee a year ago.
I'm standing Mount Gox.
And given where we are, can we just start from the beginning?
I ain't got no exchange.
You have in your
Web2
declarations
projects.
some clear outlines, but I
didn't
want to
make
make
some
sure we have this in
NFT
the record.
for a client.
There are
well.
different groups of businesses
They're cool,
under the FTX platform or umbrella. Your declarations separate the businesses into 4 silos. We described that.
Yes, for structural purposes and just for ease of presentation, we tried to take the over 100 entities and we put those in 4 silos. To demystify that, it's very simple. There was a U.S. silo, which was the FTX U.S. exchange for U.S. Investors.
The one that
There was
matters
an
to
international
everyone
exchange called FTX.com.
relevant in
again,
that
for,
room.
Non-U.S. Persons that invested in crypto.
The crazy thing.
There was Alameda, which
Like,
is
this should really
purely
actually
a crypto hedge
be
fund,
mostly
which
focused
made
on that.
other investments, venture capital type investments. Then there's a 4th entity, which was purely investments.
Yeah, but like so
although our
Dave says they have to do
investigation
full
is not
work on a
complete,
financial situation audit before they can release some funds. Yeah, I get
those
that.
investments
but
were
they're also
most
siloing
likely
all the
made
funds
with
and saying that funds
either
were
Alameda
siloed.
money or money that originally came from FTX.com.
And given that the
that 4th silo
.us one
was
is
just purely
regulated
investments.
in the US,
who
that should
own
be
those
really
4
easy to
silos?
silo. Everything should be documented.
All those entities
because it
were,
had to. It has
you know,
to file
owned or
the
controlled,
information.
by
So why not
Sam
deal with that
Bankman-Fried.
first and get
Okay.
customers whole? Maybe not
And
right
so
now, but at
can you
least say that
describe the
that's the direction
differences
they're
between
moving.
the FTX.com and FTX US silos?
Yes, very simply.
Yeah, Ray's in charge.
FTX
Ray's the CEO
US
of
was for
the
US
FTX group.
citizens who wanted to
He's basically
trade
taking
crypto.
Sam's job.
FTX.com was for, was U.S. citizens were not allowed to trade on that exchange. That's very simple. And I would make one other comment, which is separate and apart from any of those 2 silos. It was Ledger X, which is a regulated entity, regulated by the CFTC, solvent and separate from the FTX U.S. silo.
Okay, and that is a distinct silo. That's a distinct company.
Don't
That was a
think there's
distinct
enough
company within the
liquidity
US
for
silo,
the
yes.
other
Okay,
companies to cover the
so
whole,
then
but-
Alameda
I mean, Sam
Research
said that he
and the
had
venture
offers.
capital businesses, what did Alameda
Talked about it before.
Research
He said they
do?
had offers of billions of dollars. to
Essentially
make
made
customers whole.
crypto investments, engaged in margin trading, took long and short positions in crypto, essentially invested in crypto. But of course, we now know also invested in over $5 billion of other assets, which are in a variety of sectors.
And what was the practice between Alameda Research and FTX.com? Do you have you established anything you can disclose to us today?
In essence, Alameda was a user, effectively a
SBF have
customer
couple
of
billy
FTX.com.
hidden somewhere?
That's how it was essentially structured.
Sources
Was that a
today say that
distinct set of
CZ definitely
capital
does.
between those 2 companies?
Well, we now know the answer to that is no.
No. Okay. And with the information you have right now, when approximately did FTX begin to experience financial trouble?
Well, it was first disclosed to the public beginning around November 2nd.
Being asked to do some editing.
But when this began was months, if not earlier years. Our investigation is continuing. This is
I mean,
not
it's
something
fair with the
that
money
happened
that he
overnight
got
in the
loaned.
context
Like,
of a
where's
week.
all that gone?
Okay.
He says everything's frozen.
So
but,
you had the distinction between
I mean, you
FTX
can't
US,
freeze a crypto wallet.
FTX.com,
So
Alameda
did he have
Research.
all of his money in
What was
exchanges?
What was the
Is he really
relationship
that
between
guy?
FTX.com
Like,
and
does
FTX
SBF
US?
not use hardware wallets
Was
for
there a
anything?
distinction between the two?
There was a public distinction between the two. What we're seeing, though, is that the crypto assets for both FTX.com and for FTX US, were housed in the same database. It's called the AWS system, which is just an acronym for Amazon Web Services. It was all housed in the same web format.
And is that distinct from Alameda's assets?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So in your testimony, you said that there is, quote, an absence of independent governance throughout the FTX group, end quote. Yet Mr. Bankman-Fried has said that, quote, he wasn't running Alameda or making decisions on the Alameda side, end quote. Is this an accurate statement by Mr. I assume you're going to say your statement's accurate. Is Mr. Bankman-Fried's statement accurate?
I don't know the basis for his comment. I will note that he owned 90% of Alameda.
So, but you've seen no distinction in governance between the two?
Oh, absolutely not. There's no distinction whatsoever. The owners of the company could really run free rein across all four silos.
Thank you for testimony.
The gentlewoman from New York, Mrs. Velasquez, who is also the chair of the House Committee on Small Business, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Ray. You have had a long career working on several high-profile bankruptcies, most notably the Enron debacle. Mr. Ray, you were recently quoted in the New York Times as saying you have never seen such a complete failure of corporate control, and the level of dysfunction was the worst you have ever seen. Can you expand on these statements and what you have seen since taking over as CEO to make such a remark?
Yes, thank you.
Lots of great
that
content.
comment
Our Slate
went
Cast, our
to
Slate
really
Asia podcast. That's second
one
episode's coming out
thing
today.
that we found,
A
which,
new
every case is
mining
different.
podcast coming later this week.
The challenges
and our
of every
BitTalk
case is different.
podcast. Lots of podcasts.
The issue here that I was speaking to is I've just never seen an utter lack of record keeping. Absolutely no internal controls whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean,
And
there's no argument about
this
that.
case is then made difficult in that
At
context.
that level,
when you're dealing
that
with
might be a
technology.
crime in and of itself.
Mr.
in
Ray,
terms
a
his
number of
negligence in his
debtors
position.
in the FTX group are located in offshore jurisdictions. Will this complicate the efforts to retrieve the assets of those debtors? If so, why?
No, I don't think it will complicate it at all. The various jurisdictions historically in bankruptcy, and I've been in a number of cross-border situations, the jurisdictions will cooperate with each other. The regulators in all these jurisdictions, I
SBF is
think,
saying that he's
realize
not doing this
that
currently.
everyone's there for a common purpose
Specifically said that
to
John Ray is
protect
not
the
doing
victims and to recover assets for the victims of these
Again,
situations.
How much do we believe in what he says?
How much have you been able to secure, and where are most of these assets located?
We've been able to secure, over $1 billion of assets. We've secured those to cold wallets in a secure location. It's an ongoing process, though, which will take, weeks and perhaps months to secure all of the assets.
Weeks and months.
Are most
There's a
creditors
timeframe there.
located in the
It
U.S.
heard
or
potentially
foreign
could take decades given the
jurisdictions?
mess that it was.
The majority of the creditors trade through the .com silo and are outside of this jurisdiction, although there are some foreign customers that are on the U.S. silo and vice versa.
So it is my understanding
Vice
you
versa.
establish 4 silos.
Vice versa
Can
means US
you
customers on .com,
explain
which they
why
should
you
be able to
believe
do.
establishing
That's
these
actually a big deal
silos
that you
and
just
taking
threw
this
in with
approach
vice versa.
will maximize asset recovery for creditors? And do you think this approach could help determine what happened to the $1 billion that is gone missing?
Yes. So one of the reasons why we set up the silos the way we did was to first focus on the FTX silo for the U.S. It's a relatively smaller trading volume, fewer users. It's truly meant, to be for the U.S. customers. The .com
why I thought
silo
this
is
would be
really
exciting.
for non-U.S. customers, so there's a logical reason why we separated those two out.
I feel like
the
in
Alameda
these
Fund,
things, like so often,
that's just the fund
it's
that,
people that don't
that
understand
drew resources
the issues,
from the
asking
exchanges.
basic questions.
So it's really separate.
Like,
It was
this
not
would be
for
so much
customers per
better
se.
if we
It
had
was just simply a
like,
hedge fund.
some actual crypto natives
As we here
asking
in
these
Congress
questions.
consider the possibility
then,
of
like, and
legislation in this
informing
area, what is the one
the
thing that you
House
have
on
seen
what's
in your
actually
short
relevant to this?
amount of time
Like, I would
at
very much like to be on
FTX
that panel rather
that
than Ms. Velasquez.
you will urge us to keep in mind or is
we muted
needed
her.
the most?
I
just
don't
muted
want to speak to detailed regulations or make observations about
Stupid
regulations. That's
speakers
certainly not an
just go
area of my
off.
expertise. However,
If the volume's not high enough.
we're dealing with people's money and their assets. And, my basic observation is you
Why
need
is there
records,
more focus on the
you need
US
controls,
customers here?
and you need to segregate people's money.
Thank you.
That's simple.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
SPF talks about it as being like 8 billion.
Chair, I
I
yield.
think there's the 1 billion is like the stub account where some of the funds
The
went missing.
gentlewoman from Missouri, Mrs.
Yeah, someone
Wagner,
with the 45
is
I know,
now
right?
recognized for
There's a
5
problem
minutes.
with politics
I
in
thank you,
general.
Madam Chairwoman, and I thank you, Mr. Ray, for being here for the work that you're doing. Mr. Ray, you have compared FTX as worse than Enron. Can you please elaborate on some of the specific ways FTX is worse than one of the largest corporate frauds in history?
The FTX group is unusual in the sense that, I've done probably a dozen large, scale bankruptcies over my career, including Enron, of course. Every one of those entities had some financial problem or another. They have some characteristics that are in common. This one is unusual, and it's unusual in the sense that
I mean, yeah, it's bigger than
literally,
Enron.
there's no record keeping whatsoever. It's the absence of record keeping. Employees would communicate, invoicing and expenses on Slack, which is, essentially a way of communicating for chat rooms. They use QuickBooks, a multi-billion-dollar company using QuickBooks.
QuickBooks?
QuickBooks. Nothing against QuickBooks, very nice tool, just not for a multi-billion-dollar company. There's no independent board, right?
Like
we have one
QuickBooks social
person
media
really
team needs to
controlling
get on
this.
that right now.
No independent board. That's highly unusual in a size company this is. And it's made all more complex because we're not dealing with, widgets or, or something that's tangible. We're dealing with crypto. And the technological issues are made worse when you're dealing with an asset such as crypto.
Mr. Ray, Mr. Bankman-Fried has apologized. I'll subquote here, for mistakes he has made. Based on your review, is there a way to know if the transfer of FTX customer funds to Alameda Research was done by mistake?
No one's saying
I
it
don't
was done by
find any
mistake.
such statements to be credible.
Reports suggest that FTX.com transferred more than half of its customer funds, roughly $10 billion, to Alameda Research. Is that accurate, sir?
Our work is not done. We don't have exact numbers for you today, but I will say it's several $billion in that range. So we know the size of the harm was significant.
Mr. Ray, FTX.com held itself out as having a sophisticated risk management system commensurate with the size of its operations. You've touched on this a little bit. Based on your work to date, is this accurate? And can you explain the, quote, sophistication of its risk management system?
I can say that's absolutely false. There was no sophistication whatsoever. There was an absence of any management.
Mr. Ray, Mr. Bankman-Fried has been able to confuse interviewers by talking in circles around the
I don't
multiple
feel like she really
business
grasps
activities
this at all.
of
You get that so
FTX.com.
often with these
Mr. Ray, would you
things.
break down for us
Have
the
you ever watched any of this
different
stuff with like Zuckerberg
business
or any
quote
of the stuff on social
activities
media?
of
You can just tell
FTX.com?
that they don't, if they can't understand how social media works in Web 2, they've got no chance
Much of this I've
understanding
described.
an exchange
Essentially,
in crypto.
they had 2 exchanges for allowed users to trade crypto, and then there was the hedge fund. It's as simple as that. The users, were allowed to make a variety of investments. They had a more expansive ability to trade crypto if you were a non-U.S. citizen on the .com exchange. But I know it's been described publicly as very complex, and it is to some extent. But essentially, you had 2 exchanges, and you had a hedge fund. Inside both the U.S. silo, as I've mentioned, and inside the silos for .com, there were regulated entities. We have regulated entities that are, for example, in Japan that are solvent. We had a regulated entity, LedgerX, that was solvent. Those are sort of distinct from the other basic operations that we had, which was the 2 exchanges.
I thank you, Mr. Ray. And Madam Chairwoman, I'd like to submit an op-ed for the record describing an existing SEC rule that could have prevented customer assets from being misused. And I appreciate my constituent, Ron Kruszewski, President of CEO of Stifel Nicholas, for his thoughtful comments. I associate myself with those, and I'd like this entered for the record. I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on Investor Protection, Entrepreneurship, and Capital Markets,
Man-bun powers.
is now recognized
Indeed.
for 5 minutes.
For 5 years, I've been trying to ban American investments in crypto.
Ah, boo!
I'm the only member of the House to get an F from the only crypto-promoting organization that rates members of Congress. My fear is that we'll view Sam Bankman-Fried as just one big snake in a crypto Garden of Eden. The fact is, crypto is a garden of snakes.
I'm a snake! It's
Now,
a
from
snake!
the outside,
It's a badger,
crypto
badger,
just
badger,
looks
badger.
like a non-fungible
I'm sorry,
token.
Mr.
An
Sherman.
electronic pet rock for
This
the
guy
21st
still thinks
century. Something that might
dollars
be
are
good
backed
to
by
invest in,
gold.
even though it has
He's
no
the sort of
apparent
guy that goes,
value,
crypto isn't
because
backed
you might
by
get somebody
anything.
else to buy it from
It's
you
not backed
for even
by
more.
anything. No.
But in
Neither's your money.
reality, the hope of crypto is to be a currency, to compete with the U.S. dollar, and to announce its advantage over the U.S. dollar in that competition.
And
Puts
lots of other things.
the advantage right in
Let's
the name.
speak to Mr. Sherman about how
Crypto.
smart contracts work.
Hidden currency. Well, is there a big market for that? Is there a big advantage that crypto has over the U.S. dollar if it actually became a currency, which it's not yet? Well, there are drug dealers, human traffickers,
Oh, for
sanctions
God's
evaders
sake. Yeah,
who
and
find
no
that
one
to be a
uses
good
cash
feature.
for that sort of stuff.
And as Sam Bankman-Fried would tell you, there's a hell of a market for bankruptcy court evasion. But the big market is tax evasion. And I know there are some on the other side
wonder how
who
much
cheer
this guy
every time
pays
a
in
billionaire escapes taxes.
Let's see if I can look it up.
The
Let's-
other
who is this guy?
purpose,
Mr.
the other
Sherman.
announced
Mr.
purpose of crypto is to compete with the
Sherman.
U.S. dollar as a world reserve currency, thereby enriching the corporate billionaire bros
Sherman.
and taking thousands
Oh, wow.
of dollars of advantage
photo on
away
his
from every
website
American
is
family. Because we
definitely
benefit
from
from
years
being
ago.
a reserve currency. Now, Sam Bankman-Fried, or should I say inmate
Who's being
14372,
transparent now, Brad?
had
This is
one
the same
purpose
guy, right?
in all
Yeah,
of his
it is.
efforts
Okay.
here in Congress. Was a
Brad
well-known figure,
Sherman.
only one wearing shorts. His one purpose was to keep the SEC out of crypto, to provide a patina of regulation, baby regulation from the CFTC. And I'll have one comment from my colleagues. Don't trash Sam Bankman-Fried and then pass his bill. I fear that could happen because Sam was not the only crypto bro with PACs and lobbyists, and there is no PAC or lobbyist here to work for efficient tax enforcement or sanctions
It doesn't seem
enforcement.
like his tax returns
Now,
are
I've heard from
public domain.
some on the other
Classified.
side criticizing the SEC. In July, in this room, I criticized the head of the SEC for not going, the head of enforcement of the SEC for not going after crypto exchanges. But the fact is that, without objection, I'd like to put in the record a letter signed by 19 Republican members designed to push back on the SEC, a brushback pitch, if you're familiar with baseball.
Without objection, such is the order.
Thank you. Attacking the SEC for paying attention to, and I'll quote, the purported risks of digital assets. And I'd like to put in the record, without objection, comments from 8 members made in this room that were designed to attack the SEC as being a Luddite and anti-innovation
Yep.
for their efforts. Mr. Ray, you're going to be looking at FTX. We know that Sam Bankman-Fried is already faces criminal charges, but he did have help. Will you be looking for and turning over to U.S. Law enforcement
Mic
authorities
shuts off and there's a huge static
information about the possible criminal actions by Ryan
Jill, it's not just me
Salome,
coughing.
Carolyn Ellison, and the other folks in the fancy apartment?
We are doing a thorough investigation, and we will, of course, we have been cooperating with the U.S.
Hopefully the mic's
regulators
better
and law
now.
enforcement agencies.
Don't know what would be going on.
We will cooperate to turn over any information that would be relevant to them.
Thank you. And I'll point out in particular that one of the counts, count 8 in the complaint or indictment, is violation of campaign finance laws. And I hope that what you will turn over is a list of the major bonuses and/or loans. It's reported that Ryan Salome got a $55 million loan, so that law enforcement can piece together when those loans and bonuses were made and whether they immediately preceded illegal campaign, disguised campaign contributions. Can we count on you to do that?
Yes, I can confirm that.
My time has expired.
Thank you. The gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Mr.
So
Ray,
questions
for
are
appearing
over now.
before
This
the
is
committee
just
this
with
morning,
them.
particularly in light of the recent arrest of Bankman-Fried.
I find a polite way
I
of saying
expected
it.
you to be very cautious this morning in your answers, and in fact,
I
I
can't think of a
suspect
polite
you
way of
have been,
saying it,
but
so
you've
I
been
won't say
very
it.
thorough and methodical. And the committee and I appreciate indeed. First, I'd like to discuss the bankruptcy process.
So they're
Mr.
not
Ray.
going to mention
It's our
SBF's
understanding that some of
testimony
the
at all.
FTX
They're
entities
just
were not included in
ignoring
bankruptcy,
this
including Ledger X. Could
completely.
you explain why those entities
I mean, I
were not
guess
included?
maybe
and
it's
what
because
might
he's
ultimately
not
happen
here
with them?
to answer for himself, I guess.
Ledger X is a perfect example of the entities that were kept out of bankruptcy. It's a regulated entity. It's fully solvent. The customer funds were segregated. We believe that there's been no harm there whatsoever. There's no reason to put it into bankruptcy. Ultimately, we will look to sell
welcome.
Ledger
welcome
X
for the stream.
and put it in the hands
Just
of a
thought-
good steward.
We'd have a little
Would
sesh.
you expand on how
We'll put it
U.S.
on the website
bankruptcy
afterwards as
proceedings
well.
interact
People
with
can listen
international
back,
proceedings, for instance, like
get some
those in
commentary
Australia?
on what people are saying.
Yes,
because ultimately
the
this
system
whole
is
thing
really
was gonna be
designed to have a
boring.
cooperative relationship
It really
with,
was. So at least we can have a little bit of a chat.
liquidators in other
amongst ourselves.
jurisdictions. We share information.
The people
We
that left in
cooperate
there,
with
the
each
people
other
that haven't just got
relative to
completely bored by this
maximizing
rule, 'cause
customer value.
I think if
and
honestly, if I
ultimately
wasn't live streaming it,
facilitating
I'd probably turned it
distributions,
off right now and waited for
and,
Josh's summary. that's coming
overall
up on the site later.
facilitation of the completion of
So
the scheme
if Josh
in order
isn't in
to
this
render
stream,
customers
like,
as whole as possible.
He's a bad boy.
As we've all seen, of
watching
course,
the actual
SEC's
feed.
charged
He's watching
Mr.
this.
Bankman-Fried with defaulting investors along with charges from the CFTC and the Southern District of New York. In your testimony, you described FTX Group as having unacceptable management practices, and you've made that graphically clear, in particular to how Mr. Bankman-Fried is accused of. The SEC specifically alleges that one way in which Mr. Bankman-Fried diverted FTX funds to Alameda Research was by directing customers to deposit cash into Alameda-controlled bank accounts. Mr. Ray, could you explain
Yeah, this is
how
really messed up.
FTX
How
was
like
able to
FTX
conceal
apparently
that?
couldn't have a bank account towards the beginning, so you had to deposit into
You know, we're still,
Alameda,
you know,
and then they
somewhat
forgot
early in
to
our
transfer it
investigation,
across.
but we can confirm that funds were deposited directly into Alameda as opposed to FTX bank accounts. Unfortunate, obviously, situation.
One last question on the
It's hard
bankruptcy.
to argue that John Ray comes
It's been reported that
across as a lot
FTX Digital
more
and
reputable
FTX
than
Australia
SBF
were not
does,
included in the
doesn't
bankruptcy
he?
filing
Like, he
because
does have a
local
demeanor
regulators
about him,
had already
and he knows
initiated
what
their own
he's talking about.
proceedings. Is it true
Feels like an adult
that
in the
they
room.
could not have been included because of that?
Yes, our
Maybe the
filing
only adult in
occurred
this room.
on November 11, and there was other filings that had occurred shortly before.
One last thought,
Really
Mr.
like to
Ray.
see John
Clearly,
Ray
your
and
profession is
SBF
cleaning
in a
up
room
messes
talking
that
to
other
each
people
other.
have made.
That's what I think
It's
we
a fair
actually
way to
need here.
describe it. Not messes that you made, but they made. How does this compare, in your experience, magnitude-wise?
Well, it's
The
several.
worst or the worst
I mean,
by
I like this
magnitude?
Lucas guy. At least he's actually asking questions
It's one of the
rather than
worst from a
using it as a
documentation
sandbox to shit
standpoint.
on crypto.
You know, even
It's
in
a
the
garden
most
of
failed
snakes.
companies, you have a fair roadmap of what happened. We're dealing
Oh,
with
it's
literally
Brett
a
Sherman.
sort of a paperless bankruptcy in terms of how they created this company. It makes it very difficult to trace and track assets, and particularly, as I've said, in the crypto world. It's really unprecedented in terms of the lack of documentation.
Bankman-Fried clearly tried to exhibit himself as the brightest of the bright. But being bright neither makes you honest nor a fool, does it? Thank you, Mr. Ray.
Thank you. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I thank the witness for appearing today. Sir, I have
Waving
in
paper.
my left hand in a sealed indictment from a grand jury as it relates to Mr. Samuel Bankman-Fried, and in my right hand, the Securities and Exchange Commission's complaint that has been filed against the same defendant. Let's put aside the civil complaint. I have one question, but first I'd like to lay a predicate by going through these charges in the criminal complaint. Wire fraud on customers, conspiracy to commit wire fraud on lenders, conspiracy to commit commodities fraud,
He's going away for a long
conspiracy to
time.
commit securities fraud,
Like, I don't know whether you realize this. Like, when he's been doing these Twitter spaces recently. Like,
Conspiracy
these are
to
the
commit
last
money
few
laundering.
days of his free life, I feel.
and the list goes on
Like,
with a few others.
the government will get you
I
on fraud.
mention these things to you, sir,
Like, how many
because
times have you seen criminals before be the only charge they
Dr.
can't beat is
King
fraud, especially wire fraud?
reminded us that nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. Mr. Bankman-Fried has pretty much indicated that he just made a big mistake, that he was doing the best that he could to be a servant and of great service to humankind. But I would also mention this, he did attend Canada USA Math Camp, a summer program for mathematically talented high school students. He also has a degree from MIT.
Yes, he went to math camp there.
2014,
What?
bachelor's
I mean,
degree in
I
physics.
get where he's going to be going with
with a minor
this.
in mathematics. Is all of this just one big mistake that
I'm
was
interested to see
made
what John says
by
about this.
this gentleman, sir, as you see it, based upon what you've seen so far? It looks to me like there may be some malfeasance here.
You know, we're certainly, investigating everything that happened relative to these circumstances. At this stage, we're trying not to, lay judgment or put labels on actions. We're
Come
focused
on.
accumulating and maximizing the assets
You can do better
for
than
the
that.
victims. That's our number one priority. In doing so, we will also investigate potential causes of actions to maximize value. And that does require us to get into the underlying facts and motivations and what happened. So we fully expect to explore that.
The question
Thank
is,
you.
based on what you know so far, could
Would
this
you
be a
consider
mistake?
this to
Yes or
be
no?
sincere ignorance?
You can answer that.
Again, I don't want to put labels on it. Obviously, there's been failure here of a massive proportion. Ultimately, I think others will judge him by his actions.
Yeah, but we need testimony from
find it
people like yourselves that have
difficult
actually gone through the books
to believe
to make
that
comment on
we're
that.
dealing with conscientious stupidity. It seems to me that you'd have to be rather talented to do all of these things to the extent that they were done, and
I feel like
do them successfully for as long as
he was
able
greedy.
to
He was using
accomplish these
funds
things.
from the business that was
They just
profitable
don't
to
emanate
fund a
from
very lavish
ignorance and
lifestyle
stupidity.
and his friends and other
And
employees.
a lot of people have been hurt.
And he messed up
And aside from
in
the civil
not
actions,
realizing that Alameda
I think
had
that
an unlimited
we have
credit
to
line.
send a message
Or
the others
he was using that
who would
unlimited
take
credit line
advantage of
to
people
siphon even more funds out.
that this is not going to be tolerated.
But
And I
that
thank you
seems
for
to be
what
the
you've
long and the
done.
short
You've
of
been
it.
very direct. I read your testimony.
He spent a load of
And
money
based upon your testimony,
from the business
it just
that he
seems
shouldn't
to
have
me
done,
that we
that he's
have
probably
more
liable for
than
loads of taxes on.
sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity.
And Alameda had access to funds
I
that they
yield
shouldn't
back the
have done,
balance of my time.
which was either
Thank you, the gentleman
bad
from
trading by
Texas.
Caroline
Mr.
or
Sessions?
Madam Chairman,
collusion
thank you
between
very
him and
much.
Caroline
Mr. Ray,
to
thank
siphon
you
more
very
funds
much
out.
for being here. I think each of our members have been sincere in saying thank you for
Seems
your professionalism and adding this to your
Open and
career
shut,
of
my
other
point of view,
restructuring that you
at this point.
have not only experience in, but bringing to bear. I've got several questions, and perhaps you can answer them, which would help me. At its best, largest point of investor exposure by an American
Sessions.
investor, what amount of money do you think that was held in FTX?
I'm not in a position really to give you individual numbers at this point. We do know with the U.S., there's hundreds of millions of dollars that were at stake. And of course, on the .com, which is the international exchange.
Right, it's only hundreds of millions of
it's in the
dollars on
billions of
FTX the
dollars.
US. Just sort that one out first. That's
One of the
should be your
difficulties we
duty.
have is that,
It's US
there's
customers
millions of accounts.
in the US.
Some of those accounts, could be by multiple users. So we're
Why
in the
is that not the
process of really
focus?
analyzing how those accounts roll up to individual customers.
Are you aware of the SEC at any point asking questions, coming to visit, providing paperwork about these hundreds of millions or billions of dollars that drew some attention from the SEC about this American investment, or what I would say exposure?
I'm not, but you have to recognize that I, parachuted in on November 11th, so I have no history with the company whatsoever.
So you do not know about any questions, interaction? Have you heard about whether there was an attempt to avoid any of this? Was any of it ever discussed by any of the people that you have gained information from?
I'm not privy to anything on a pre-petition basis.
Thank you. Do you have an idea about the value of assets that was lent to FTX, by FTX or Alameda to Mr. Bankman-Fried, the amount of money that they loaned him?
Well, we know that the size of the loss, measured essentially, at this period of time is several $billion, but you have to remember that, asset values, fluctuate. So how much the assets are worth at the time that they may have been transferred to FTX.com may be a different number than the loss as of any particular date.
The bots are
We do, of course, know that we have several $1 billion of losses, and we know that there was
know, right,
billions
Angela?
of dollars lent out, billions of dollars of other investments. So that we essentially have a roadmap to figure that out.
The roadmap that
I mean, it
you're
feels like we're just
speaking
listening
about
to SBF talk, doesn't it?
in your
I
past.
don't have the information about that. Who
claim
does
you
have the
necessarily
information
know
then?
Now, were
Bloody hell.
IRS forms that were filled out by the company, were they properly filled out? Have you looked at those to see that they were complying with the IRS law?
We are looking into that very thing. We've hired Ernst & Young. They are taking a comprehensive review. They're going backwards and starting with the earlier years. We're reviewing the return that was filed in 2020, 2021, and of course, they're looking at all the transactions within 2022. So that review is ongoing, and we certainly will look at that in detail.
As an expert, I would consider you an expert in this arena.
Do
Would
not
you
recall.
think that it would be important that the SEC, and I don't know the law, but would have access to, as part of their any due diligence they were doing, to look at that IRS filing to determine perhaps whether someone
I
was
love this
or
guy.
was
He's
not
like, he's
following
like,
the law?
so
Would that
all
be
these
part of
checks
a
and
due
balances we have
diligence?
within the U.S.
We
government
certainly
for
would
the
make,
U.S.
you know,
entity.
anything like
Do we
that
not have
available
any
to
information
of
on
the
any of
regulatory
this?
agencies, whether it's the SEC or the IRS. You know, we're fully cooperative to them. Anything that would aid in their investigation, it would be available to them.
Do you think it would be pertinent for this committee to be able to receive that IRS information going back so that we would make a determination about whether proper utilization of oversight was being done?
We certainly,
like-
you know, we
I
want
like
to be
where he's
cooperative
going
with the
with
committee
this.
as well, and we can certainly work with staff to address what you might need.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman, Chairwoman.
Thank you. The gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Cleaver, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on Housing, Community Development, and Insurance, is now recognized for 5
So?
minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Ray, thank you so kindly for being here today. Have you read the full testimony that was planned?
Thank you. We're only like
missing
an hour
guest.
in.
I have not read his
Oh,
full
of course he's
testimony.
not.
I've some pieces of it have been relayed to me, but I've not read it. I've not read one word of it, actually.
Yeah, I don't know him personally and probably don't want to, but his testimony is so disrespectful. I mean, there's not a person up here who would like to show this to their children in line 2 of this missive. He says, and I quote, "I would like to start out by formally stating under oath." And I can't even say it publicly. The next 2 words, absolutely insulting. This is the Congress of the United States. And I'd like to
That's the
submit
best
this,
bit about it.
Madam Chair, for the record.
Without objection, if you're inserting that into the record. Without objection, such is the order.
I want to follow up.
Wait, so
on
that's
what
only
Mr.
gone into
Sessions,
record now?
discussion Mr. Sessions
I do not
was
get how
having
the US
with you
works.
on this, the issue. And if you are required, I mean, we have one requirement that you are supposed to submit to each customer and the IRS, the Form 109B, right?
Yes.
What else are you required to do?
I'd have to defer to the tax folks. They're experts in that field, and I'm sure they'll do a thorough review of what should have been submitted.
No, what do you know now that you are supposed to submit other than the 109B to every customer and to the Internal Revenue Service?
Where's the
You know,
other?
I don't know personally at this point, what was required to be submitted. You know, that's part of our review with our independent accountants.
Well, could you expand or maybe even update us on the extent of the poor controls in the areas previously identified in your November 17th declaration?
It's, you know, it's an extensive list. It really crosses the entire spectrum of the company, from lack of lists of bank accounts.
I mean, gutted he didn't ask him
Hundreds of
about
bank
some of the
accounts,
allegations that
dispersed all over the
SBF
world.
made.
Lack of a,
Because he's under oath.
just a complete list of employees and their functions by group or name. Extensive use of, you know, independent contractors as opposed to employees. Lack of insurance that you normally would see in certain businesses. Either inadequate insurance or complete gaps in insurance. For example, the Alameda silo had no insurance whatsoever. So those are, I mean, there's,
No
the list
insurance
goes on and on.
whatsoever.
You know, we could spend all day on that.
Public
yeah, we
liability
have
insurance
time.
is like required by law in the UK. I don't know how the US works.
I wonder if you would support a resolution that I've been thinking about introducing, changing the name of cryptocurrency to creepy dough currency. I'm gonna
You
discuss
had
this
me in
with
the
my
first
colleagues.
half.
I think it's an appropriate name. I just wanted to know whether you would support changing it to creepy dough.
I'll leave that skill set to the committee.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
What?
Thank you. The gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Lukemeyer, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Creepy dough.
Mr. Ray, it's been reported that FTX
Creepy
couldn't get a
dough
bank account for some time. As a result, FTX used Alameda Research's.
I mean, he was
bank
very
accounts.
offended by the F word, so.
Does this raise any red flags for you? The fact they couldn't find a way to get a bank account?
Well, there's a few red flags. Obviously, the bank situation should have been a real red flag.
Our inside
for
Slack's
someone
now
being
blowing up
asked
with
to
their
deposit
creepy
money
dough.
into an account that was not the exchange account. Certainly should have been a red flag for customers.
Is Alameda a U.S. chartered bank or is it offshore? Or the bank that they were using, I should say.
It's really not a bank per se. It's just most of the entities in the structure are, I mean, they're just unregulated entities.
So it's just an entity that passes through money. It's a hedge fund that does things. It doesn't have a bank account per se?
Oh, it has bank accounts, absolutely.
Are they in the U.S.?
Yes.
Okay, so here we have a company that's offshore. It can't get a bank account offshore. It has to come into the U.S. to be able to do its banking business. In other words, and the important part of this comment is that in order for these companies to exist,
Dave.
they've got to be able to change their digital assets into hard U.S. dollars at some point. So they need a bank account. And so they needed Alameda to be able to do that. Is that roughly correct?
Any of the silos had in bank accounts, that certainly, exists. Separate bank accounts do exist. I think the real issue here for us is that money was transferred from one account to the other, seemingly without limit. That is the issue.
Okay, you talked about the accounting issues. It's interesting from the standpoint that we're talking today about a problem with these cryptocurrency firms, with securities firms, and we can't have an accounting system that actually works. This should be a really big red flag for all of us who are in the financial services world with regards to the Chinese investments that we're making, and we're not able to get accounting information on those firms. What else is going on with those firms, similar to what the debacle is that we have here with FTX? That's just a sidelight comment. One of the questions I've got is with regards to the Farmington State Bank. This is an investment that Alameda made into, and it's a little bitty bank according to a New York Times article. State of Washington, 26th smallest bank out of 4,800 in the country. They bought it in 2020, had a net worth of $5.7 million, and they dropped $11.5 million in for a percentage of the ownership. Do you know off the top of your head what the percentage of ownership was in that bank that they purchased?
I believe that ownership was approximately 10%, but I can.
Okay, that's what I've heard too. So therefore, they paid 20 times book, which is off the charts outrageous. So it should be a red flag over the place. Yet they were able to purchase that, even though it's a minority interest, but 20 times book. FDIC allowed that to happen. They changed names to Moonstone Bank. And since then, they've 4 separate accounts have dropped to roughly 71 million, again, according to FDIC data and according to this article. Have you looked at this relationship at all yet to see what's going on here and whether there's any irregularities at all?
We are looking at it. It certainly is one of the things that came to our attention fairly quickly. We're looking at what the dollars were that went from the FTX group to that bank, and we're looking at the connections of that bank to the Bahamas.
Is it the way this all transacted here? Is this common, by the way, that they purchase businesses and dump excessive amounts of money based on the fact they had it, whether it was a good investment or not, in all these different companies? I mean, this looks like a really excessive investment to actually go out and buy a bank to be able to do something with it, stuff it full of money. So I don't know, is there money laundering going on here? Is there some missing
I've said it a few
dollars?
times,
Is somebody stuffing away something in their
None of
back
this
pocket to
is,
be able
or
to
hardly
some-
any of
at
this
some
is
point down
focused
the road
on
take off
anything
with
to
it?
do with the US.
Is that what's going on here? I mean, it begs a lot of
maybe
questions
some of
here
the
when you see
other
this kind of activity.
companies. There's a lot of
There's
shell
a lot more
companies.
questions than there are answers.
Do you want to see an image
Certainly it's
of
highly irregular, and it's
where 5
gotten our
of
attention.
Sam's companies
Well, I thank you for your
are
comments
based?
this morning, and it's concerning when you see this sort of lack of accounting, and you see somebody dealing in this sort of level of money, and there's lots of different companies where money ships back and forth, and you wonder by living offshore in
5
the
of
Bahamas,
Sam's
if there's not some
companies are based
faraway bank
here.
account that's being stuffed with money we'll never ever find. I hope you do your job and do it well, Mr.
Shell-caught.
Ray. Thank you for being here this morning.
There's another one as well, yeah. Here you go, here's a nice one.
Thank you.
There you go.
The gentleman from
That's where a lot of
Colorado,
Sam ran
Mr.
his money
Perlmutter,
through. A lot of,
who is
where
also the
Sam
chair
ran a
of the
lot of his money
Subcommittee
through.
on Consumer Protection
few
and
companies,
Financial
I think.
Institutions. You're now recognized for 5 minutes.
North Wireless Dimension,
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Paperbird,
Mr. Ray, I have so many
Verdant
questions,
Canyon
it's hard
Capital,
to figure out
Hilltop
what
Technology
questions to
Service,
ask.
and
So
Island
let's
Bay
just
Ventures.
Start with some easy ones. How long have you been on
None of
this
those
job?
companies do anything.
4 weeks.
4 weeks.
No reference to them anywhere online other
Do you
than
know
from the
when the
bankruptcy
Madoff bankruptcy was filed?
Probably circa 2008, I guess. I don't
So
know.
say 2008. And do you know they just made a distribution out of that bankruptcy last week?
That's what I understand, yes.
So that's, what, 14 years? How
Yes.
old are you?
Is that a permitted question?
Because I want you to add 100 to whatever your age is when you finally untangle all of this. The reason I say that is we watched this FTX, but a bunch of other
This is the
crypto
thing, especially the
companies
FTX to
start
the US.
thrashing
How long is
about,
it going to be before
say,
anyone gets their
9,
money back,
10,
really?
12
He said
months
a few
ago,
weeks or months.
And as the house of
How well is
cards
that gonna
started
age?
falling down, the thrashing became more. We had something like that in Colorado back in the 80s when the savings and loans were failing, and everybody was sort of trading their funny money. We called it trading cats for dogs to hide lousy loans, to not show the failures of those particular banks. Here, your job, I think, as the bankruptcy trustee or conservator or whatever you are, is to go gather as many assets as you can, and that could be from some very innocent people who got paid money, to then spread it out equally among who you think the real creditors are, or, I mean, is that sort of a fair statement?
It's a general statement, but it's not far off.
Well, because we on this committee, and a number of us had to deal with the Madoff stuff, one of the things you're going to face is some guy say, I'm more innocent than that guy. I should get to keep my money, even though I got paid yesterday, but I'm an innocent guy. You're going to be dealing with so many preferences, so many fraudulent transfers. I mean, have you any idea what the total money
like
in and the
this.
total
How's
money
that
out
been
of
going?
FTX was?
We don't
like
have
an
a
hour
full
and 43
accounting at this early
minutes.
stage, no.
So it's about an hour and a half
Do you
long.
know how
There's
much
been maybe
was in
3
tokens?
interesting
So
questions,
let's say
3
I have
relevant questions,
Dogecoin, or I don't
maybe
even know how
2
you
relevant
say it.
answers.
But I have 10 Dogecoin, which a
Dogecoin.
year ago, is it Dogecoin or Dogecoin? Dogecoin. All right,
There you go,
I have
he's learned
10
something.
Dogecoins.
It's the one thing he's
All right?
learned. during
year
all of this.
ago, 10 Dogecoins, for sake of argument, was worth $1,000. So $100 a coin.
Dogecoin to
I
1,000.
put that in there.
You hear that first? Congress, no,
But
the House
Dogecoin
committee
today is worth,
has
like,
said
I
that
don't know,
Doge is going to
say
1,000.
Not nearly that much. I mean, how are you going to evaluate
Whoops.
that as to what I should get out of the bankruptcy?
Well, at first it starts with doing an accounting and a tracing of all the assets, both the ins and the outs.
There you go. That's the
And that's
supply
made
of
difficult, of course,
Doge.
by the
Let's times it by
commingling of
1,000.
assets. So perhaps you may have invested in
That
a
million,
certain,
billion,
coin or an
$132
altcoin.
trillion industry.
We'll have to trace what
Dogecoin,
happened to that coin, because again, what we've explained here
$132
today and through
trillion
our
dollar
testimony
industry.
is there's
You heard it
commingling
here
of
first.
assets, so that makes it
To the
a
moon.
bit more complicated than simply how much
Right,
is my coin worth, right?
I want to
So it's going to be a
Please don't.
painstaking
You know what?
process of
I bet Dogecoin is
looking for the
pumping.
ins and outs,
I
what
bet
happened
you
to your
Dogecoin is
crypto.
pumping.
Of course, at the bankruptcy, at the time of the bankruptcy, we know when that occurred. We have a very specific time when that bankruptcy occurred, and we will look at customer accounts as of that date, and that will be determined essentially what your account position was. But of course,
Had a little uptick.
assets, vary
Move the market.
in terms of fluctuating in
0.09%.
value. And again, because of the
Elon has more
circumstances
power
we
than
find
Congress.
ourselves in the lack of documentation, the potential commingling between silos, and then also what happened with Alameda taking funds from FTX.com.
I mined Dogecoin
It isn't
back
as
in
simple
2014
as,
and sold it
how
all.
many coins did I have in my account?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is if I put $1,000 in and it's gone, and I put 10 Dogecoins in and they're gone, eventually you're going to have to figure that out. And my guess is you will be back here in a year when you have a better handle on the numbers to be talking to this committee. And thank you for doing this. I yield back.
Thank you very much. You know by
basically
now
just
that
side-eyed
Mr.
him
Perlmutter
saying,
is a bankruptcy attorney.
your presence
You can
here
tell
is
by those
futile.
questions. So this would be a good time to enter into the record without objection. I would like to enter into the record the indictment of Sam Bankman-Fried by the Southern District of New York that was unsealed this morning, and the separate filings from the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, both of which were filed this morning. Thank you. With that, the gentleman
I've
from
seen the
Michigan,
Southern
Mr.
District one.
Heisinger, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Definitely seen the
Thank you, Madam
SEC
Chair
and
and
the CFTC.
Mr. Ray. I'm going to get my colleague to shift a little bit or get up. Thank you. One quick question. Have
He
you been
actually has
sharing
someone
your
move 'cause the camera
findings,
couldn't see him
with the
properly.
SEC at all?
Let's get my colleague to
As
shift.
you've been
a
going
little
through
bit.
this?
Yes,
Okay. How about the Southern District of New York?
yes.
Okay. I'm going to get to a couple of practical questions because I think these were the things I was going to ask you and then also ask Mr. Bankman-Fried. In your declaration, you said that the, quote, the FTX.com platform was not available to U.S. users, close quote. However, earlier this month, CFTC Chairman Benham suggested in testimony before the Senate Agriculture Committee that 2% of funds housed at FTX.com were from U.S. individuals. Can you confirm whether there were U.S. individuals or persons, in fact, customers of FTX.com?
Yes, we found that there's a small number of U.S. customers that had engaged.
You can't stop
as
everyone using like
customers.
VPNs.
Is
and
2%
stuff.
small in your estimation, or is it less or more?
Creating an offshore bank account.
We don't have those kind of numbers on
mean, yeah,
an
it's
investor
partially
basis. We
relevant.
have it on a customer basis.
But I love
you're
this,
talking
like,
about
all
less
of
than a couple hundred.
FTX.us
But it could amount to billions.
is
I mean,
US
you said
customers,
earlier it is
arguably maybe
billions of
1%
dollars that was in
outside.
there, or at least it could be
But
millions
we're
or
going to
hundreds of
ignore
thousands.
that.
We
But
don't
is
know
maybe
that number, or do
2%
you
of
know that?
FTX.com
I don't
to
know
do
that
with
number.
US customers?
The
Because we want to
billions
make
of
sure that
funds.
this is to do with us.
Okay. Well,
Just like
you
we now
mentioned that
apparently
was
own
billions.
Ethereum because
clearly-
validators
I'm giving
are
you the
based in
range.
the US.
Yeah,
So,
clearly as U.S. customers there, we don't have an accounting of what those particular customers had in the document.
America.
Will determining this be part of your work through this bankruptcy process?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Will part of your work be determining which assets belong to which customers, more specifically U.S. customers of FTX.com?
Yes, we will do really a tracing analysis that will try to identify, both the sources and the uses of all the funds.
So whether it's 10 customers that had a lot of money or 1,000 customers that had some money.
Absolutely.
Okay. Can you provide some indication of whether customer funds from FTX.com were in fact transferred to Alameda Research?
Well, it's definitely assets of customers in the .com silo were transferred to Alameda, no question about it. We have not seen this at this stage from the U.S. silo. But of course, you know, we do have one concern, and that's the concern we're chasing down, which is whether or not there's commingling between that .com silo and the U.S. silo exchanges.
Okay,
And
there we
the
go.
reason for that is we know that there was sort of common control and access of authorized users at this most senior management level amongst all of the assets. So it's something we have to focus on. We haven't seen evidence right now of that, but certainly that's something that we need to investigate and trace.
Okay, and my remaining 2 minutes, I want to turn a little bit to operations. Is there any evidence of his parents' involvement in the operations?
We're investigating that, as well as any other, you know, players in the,
Email, Slack,
you know,
Signal.
it's billions of records. It's a very vibrant environment.
Yeah, but
so
you could
I
just look
hear
for the
that
users, right?
you haven't discovered that. I mean, it would seem interesting that that they didn't either give legal advice or business advice or parental advice, maybe.
Well, certainly, clearly, and I think in our first day papers, we indicated that that Mr. Bankman had given legal advice.
Okay, had he been an employee of FTX, as has been reported?
You know, I don't know if he actually had an employee status, but he certainly received payments from, the family did receive payments.
Okay, that sounds like employment to me. You got a payment for, okay. Well, I raise that because on December 8 of 2021, I met with Sam Bankman-Fried in my office, which I will note was just immediately before he came down to the hearing. He was at least 15 minutes late, and his father accompanied him in that meeting. I asked and focused on what types of regulation he was under, his engagement with regulators, and how that affected FTX. But it seems to me that there's a lot more to uncover here. Certainly, Mr. Bankman-Fried has let's say, wooed many in New York, Silicon Valley, around the world, and yes, certainly here in D.C. He was, they loved, I think everybody loved the exciting idea of a politically progressive, smart entrepreneur who was going to reimagine capitalism and change the world, feeling better about themselves, all while making them gobs of money. And I'm glad to see it's finally unraveled. So my time is up, and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from Ohio, Mrs. Beatty, who is also the chair of the subcommittee
doing its thing, though.
on diversity and inclusion, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
First of all, let me just say thank you to Chairwoman Waters and our ranking member, and certainly to you, Mr. Ray. We have heard a lot. A lot of this has been difficult to digest, primarily because of what has happened to so many people and so much money involved. Mr. Ray, you mentioned in your testimony that one of your primary goals is to limit to the greatest extent possible the harm suffered by FTX customers. Hundreds and hundreds of $millions have been removed from crypto wallets, and in its estimates that about 1 million people have money frozen in the exchange. Can you?
That's not me.
For all, and the likely funds back. And if you can't answer that question, might have the information.
I don't know where that laughing was from.
Ms. Beatty, would you repeat the question? You were interrupted for a minute or so there.
Oh, I am sorry. I am at home recovering, so sorry about any connection. Basically, hundreds of dollars have been removed from crypto wallets, and it's estimated that about 1 million people have money frozen in their exchange. Can you tell us how many users have lost money, and when will they get their money back?
Well, our process is such that, you know, we are securing our assets every day. Every day we are out looking for wallets and the keys to those wallets to maximize the recovery of value. So that's an ongoing process. We've secured all the cash in the bank accounts to the extent that we can at this point. We've secured crypto assets. We're still in the process of doing that. I mean, ultimately, that's a question of months. The litigation has been pointed out by other members. Certainly will take a longer time frame, but that is our number one focus is to generate value to repay those customers. I don't have a customer account for you today. We do know that there was 2.7 million users in the U.S. silo, which again overstates the customer relationships because people had multiple trading accounts. And in the .com silo, we had over 7.6 million users, again, overstating the actual customer relationships due to the multitude of accounts by any particular customer. So we need to get to the bottom of those customer numbers.
Thanks, Mr. Ray. Let me ask you this. Despite the fact that FTX told customers it would not trade customers' funds, we know now that FTX loaned out, I think, about $10 billion in customer assets for proprietary trading.
The fact that they can just have like about
Mr.
10
Ray, do
billion.
you know
These numbers
how
are
it
just
was
so
possible
big,
for
they lose all
FTX
meaning.
to access clients' funds in violation of its own terms of service that read, without clients' permission, and exposes customers to such massive loss?
Well, as I indicated, I mean, there was no corporate controls, no corporate oversight, no independent board, and the owners of the business, the senior management, had virtual control of the accounts of each of the silos and could move money or assets, as they desired, undetected by customers. To the extent there were rules, and there were very few, obviously they were made to be broken.
So I think what I'm hearing you saying is that there was no one personally approved this. Let me ask you a last question. Can you tell us what regulatory changes could prevent the unauthorization or the unauthorizing customers' funds in the future based on your wealth of experience?
Ignoring it.
Without speculating about what regulatory fix there could be, and I've said in my earlier testimony, the critical thing is segregation of customer funds and transparency.
Mm-hmm. That's fair.
Okay, and lastly, in your 5 points that you outlined, and I'm sorry if you said it before, is there a timetable that you think you can get to that? And that can be a yes or no. I think I'm getting close to my time.
Like trading desks.
There's no particular time frame,
Tastyworks,
but it's as quickly as possible, in my experience with Enron.
And is that months? Is that weeks? Quickly as possible?
It certainly isn't weeks. It's definitely months, and the causes of action, could take longer. But we will marshal assets on a weekly basis and on a monthly basis, and we'll do that as quickly as possible.
Thank you so much for taking the time to try to help us out. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Barr, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Ray, in your declaration, you said that many of the companies in the FTX group did not have appropriate corporate governance and that this situation is unprecedented.
Far left.
You also, in your testimony today, said that the FTX collapse stems from the lack of an independent board and a complete failure of any internal controls or governance whatsoever. Can you elaborate in describing the governance structures for FTX.com that led you to make those comments?
Well, first and foremost, there's no independent board of directors. So one of the first things that I did was put on an independent board of directors led by our chairperson, who's the former U.S. attorney, and Honorable Joseph Farnan, former U.S. District Court judge. So put in a corporate structure of independent directors, put in separate officers, the new officers of the company.
Are they all getting
put
paid?
in a new CFO, a new chief information
So I
officer.
know they filed a
new head of
motion
administration,
to
all
make sure that
independent,
certain creditors would be
with,
paid.
with some background and experience in these sectors.
Be very
None of the
interesting
employees,
if
I mean, there's
the
a lot of
board that
titles in
he's
the company,
put
but
in
no experience
are
to
getting
back
paid
it up.
right now.
Can you
Not
can you
saying that it's not
explain
the right
how
thing,
the FTX.com governance structure differs from the
Dunno.
governance structures of
Sam has raised
FTX
some
US?
potential questions over this whole thing.
Virtually no difference. There was no structure.
I think they're worth looking
Mr.
into.
Ray, in your work so far, have
Not
you
saying that they're
examined the
true.
governance structure or the flow of assets to the FTX Foundation or its various affiliates, including FTX Community, FTX Climate, or the Future Fund?
We are digging into that. We've not completed our review.
I am curious in your work whether or not you will determine whether those entities were established properly as non-profits or whether or not the funds received were improperly transferred customer accounts. Do you have any visibility into that yet?
We're looking at that right now. We've asked our folks at Ernst & Young to look at the tax side of it, and we're investigating the money transfers. So you can be sure we're going to dig into those details.
Was the FTX Foundation and those other not-for-profit, ostensibly not-for-profit entities, were they completely separate from any of the for-profit entities?
They were owned by Sam Bankman-Fried. I can't tell you that they were separate because they got funds from Alameda. So we know the source of their funding was from the FTX group. There was separate ownership, but not separate, funding.
So commingled assets in that case as well?
Absolutely.
Okay. At least one ESG ratings firm gave FTX a higher score for governance than ExxonMobil. Given your testimony that FTX's collapse stems from the absolute concentration of control in the hands of a very small group of grossly inexperienced and unsophisticated individuals who failed to implement virtually any of the systems or controls necessary for a company that is entrusted with other people's money or assets, what would you say about this ESG governance rating, which rated FTX higher than
I'm not in a
ExxonMobil?
position to comment.
I'd get my money back.
Oh, okay.
Can you identify which entities had audited financial statements?
Yes, I can. So there was no audit at Alameda, no audit at the venture silo. There was audit at the U.S. silo, and also audit at the .com silo. I can't speak to the integrity or quality of those audits. We're reviewing, obviously, the books and records. And as I've said earlier, much of those books and records were maintained on, fairly unsophisticated ledger workbooks.
And you testified of the lack
Can't
of record
believe they're
keeping.
using QuickBooks.
And so there's a whole lot of financial statements that are either not audited or not available. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
In your declaration, you stated that you did not believe that those audited financial statements were reliable. Can you elaborate on why you believe that to be the case?
Well, we've lost $8 billion, right, of customer money. So by definition, I don't trust a single piece of paper in this organization.
Sam Bankman-Fried, in his testimony to this committee on December 8th of last year, said that FTX has designed and offered a platform with a market structure that is risk-reducing. To be sure, there are irresponsible actors in the digital asset industry, and those actors attract the headlines, but FTX is not one of them. Was that statement incorrect?
False, yes.
Thank you. And let me conclude by describing what is going on here by a popular crypto commentator. If you set up an exchange where you're the market maker, you're the issuer, you're the prime broker, and then you trade against your own customers, you have a vested interest in creating the assets, promoting the assets, and manipulating the price of the assets. What you have is a crypto casino. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from California, Mr. Vargas, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to begin by thanking you once again for taking the lead to hold bad actors accountable and pursue transparency in the cryptocurrency space. And also, Mr. Ray, I want to thank you for being here today to testify. I think I start off a little bit like Paul Krugman does in the New York Times. I don't get the point. I really don't get the point of blockchain and cryptocurrency. It's like keeping track of how many times you chew gum, like who cares? There's other ways that are, I think, less fraudulent to make transactions. But anyway, that being said.
But anyway, I'm making
how
no
many times
sense.
have we
But anyway,
talked
let's
here
talk about
the
something else.
Potential for abuse, of fraud, and in the crypto market quite a bit.
Blockchain is the same
We've had a lot
as
of
keeping
cheerleading
count of the
from
number
some
of pieces
people,
of chewing gum
especially
you
on the
chew.
other side of the aisle. I don't hear it today. Haven't heard it yet.
The
but
U.S.
I
government,
do want
ladies
to
and
hear it
gentlemen.
like we normally hear it, how wonderful it is and how they shouldn't be regulated by the SEC, that they're too tough on them. Imagine we're not going to hear that today, especially after what we saw with FTX. But we do want to see order and transparency in this industry and throughout the financial markets. If you are an issuer of cryptocurrency or a manager of cryptocurrency exchange, and you conduct business with U.S. customers, consider this FTX collapse as your public service announcement. Come into compliance with the Securities Act of 1933, the Securities Act of 1934, and all other applicable federal and state laws. Do not skirt the law, mishandle U.S. citizens' funds, and then claim innocence. For the cryptocurrency industry to continue, citizens need to be informed, regulators need to uphold the laws, and companies need to comply. Now that wasn't happening, was it, Mr. Ray, under this particular company?
No, sir.
Coneheads.
Why wasn't it?
Again, you have control in a small group of
came up for me.
individuals without any oversight whatsoever, from an independent board or experienced managers. It's just a recipe for problems.
What government entity is responsible for this fiasco?
That's not for me to say.
No, it is for you to say. You're right there, and I'm asking you. If you had to opine, that's why you're there in the hot seat. Who is it? Should the SEC have been more aggressive, even though we had a lot of our friends on the other side saying they shouldn't have been? Should the SEC have been more aggressive?
I'm not experienced. I'm not a regulatory lawyer. I'm not here to express views about who should regulate it. And I've said, and very clearly, that we need transparency. Customers need to have segregated accounts. They need to have ownership. It's their money, it's assets. It's really no different than a bank. You'd expect the same level of scrutiny of any funds that you have on deposit with someone else. That is a minimum.
I agree with everything you've said, but at the same time, I have to say that the product that they give is a hybrid product, is it not?
Well, it's a currency. It's an alternative currency, yes.
So then who should regulate it?
I don't have an opinion on that.
You don't?
Mr. Congressman, no.
Okay. Well, that's the whole problem, I think. I don't get the point of cryptocurrency to begin with.
Well, then why are you here?
Other than, if you're a terrorist or someone that wants to hide money, and then I get the point. But other than that, I don't
You
get
can
the
hide
point
money in
myself.
cash way
But
better.
if we are
I'm
going
sure
to
we all
have
know
it,
about every single penny
we
that
have
you've
to
got, don't
regulate.
we?
Someone has to be in charge. We have to make sure that we don't continue to defraud the American people. And that's where the government
You've
comes
not
in.
spoken about the
Somebody's gotta
American
take
people for
charge
this
of
pretty much entire
I think it's
hearing.
the SEC. I've always thought it was the SEC. They had a lot of pushback from my friends on the other side. I didn't hear them quite today, pushing back as they normally do. I'd love to see that. But again, someone has to regulate this if it's going to exist. Don't you agree?
I certainly think there has to be more controls in this sector. Who should regulate it? I defer to this committee.
With that, Madam Chair, I yield my time back.
Thank
you.
God.
Thank you. Now, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Williams, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Ray, for being here. Appreciate it. There's been many comparisons that have been made as people examine what happened to FTX, and from Bernie Madoff to Enron, it looks like this will go down as one of the largest frauds in history. And Mr. Ray, you have a unique perspective on the fact that you have worked on the Enron bankruptcy. I'd be interested in real quick if you talk a little bit real quick about how it compares. You got cut off in the early time, and I'd like to hear a little bit about that.
Enron was really a different company. The crimes that were committed there were highly orchestrated financial machinations by highly sophisticated people to keep transactions off balance sheets. This is really old-fashioned embezzlement. This is just taking money from customers and using it for your own purpose.
Yep.
Not sophisticated at all. Sophisticated perhaps in the way they were able to sort of hide it from people, frankly, right in front of their eyes. But this isn't
how's that different?
Sophisticated whatsoever. This is just plain old embezzlement.
Old school.
Old school.
There you go. It seems like
Exactly. It's nothing to do
Freed
with
had
blockchain.
some interesting ideas on how
or
he can
chewing
stay
gum.
relevant in the FTX world, and even after stealing customers' money and driving the company into bankruptcy. And I have read that he wants to be retained as an outside
Oh, he
consultant.
can't. He's arrested.
And been very critical of your own appointment, quite frankly, into this position. So after his arrest last night, all of his wishes seem even more unlikely. So what role, if any, should he play in FTX moving forward?
The role he's currently playing. Okay. Zero.
Good. You stated that FTX was a platform allowing for users to trade digital assets. Were users engaging in simple exchanges of assets, or were users permitted to engage in leveraged, complex transactions?
You already know this. If you don't know this, you've not done your research.
Sorry, could you repeat your question?
Sure. You stated that FTX was a platform allowing for users to trade digital assets. Were users engaging in simple exchanges of assets, or were users permitted to engage in leveraged, complex transactions?
Yes.
Okay. You also stated that you have recovered over $1 billion in assets. Can you give a description of the nature and type of assets you have recovered to date?
We've recovered over $1 billion of crypto assets. These are, coins of various nature, and we've secured those. But that's been our primary focus. We've certainly also secured, our cash in all of our bank accounts. The bank accounts were frozen. We've got control over those accounts with new authorized users, which certainly includes myself. But our main goal is to secure the cash and secure the crypto assets, and that is an ongoing venture.
Okay. Thank you for being here, and I yield my time back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Guam, Mr. San Nicolas, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Ray, thank you for being with us here today. There's a lot of people following this trying to understand what happened for a variety of reasons. Of course, your primary responsibility will be to make sure that the creditors are made whole, as well as depositors and everybody else who has a stake in varying degrees within the company. My first question is, have you been able to pinpoint the specific cause for FTX's collapse? I know that there's all kinds of stories about loans to the owner and no internal controls, loans to Alameda, commingling. But is there a specific trigger point or a specific cause that has resulted in the FTX collapse?
I think I've described it. It's really just the unlimited ability of those in control positions to borrow customer funds or take customer funds and then deploy them for their own use. That use involved margin trading, which is inherently risky, and of course they've spent enormous amounts of money beyond that. But it's really the misuse of funds, and it's as simple as that, on a large scale basis.
So what is the big picture balance loss as a result of this bankruptcy? How much has FTX lost as a result of this?
We don't have exact numbers, but we know
Ballpark?
it's several billion dollars, in excess of $7 billion.
In excess of $7 billion?
Yes.
So in excess of $7 billion, we're saying that the Sam Bankman-Fried and Company basically took or misallocated $7 billion, and that's why FTX has collapsed.
Right. So funds were taken from customers, funds were invested, trading losses incurred in Alameda, and then funds were deployed that will never be valued at the same dollar amount. There was over $5 billion of investments made. Certainly there's some value there, and we will try to get that value and sell those assets. But oftentimes, even when he made those sorts of investments, whether it was directly or through others in management, Sometimes he would do that really without any pro forma or any valuation. Not really quite sure how some of the purchase price numbers were derived. So it gives you a sort of worry, obviously, that the purchases were overvalued. So there's a concern there as well.
So Alameda lost $7 billion as a result of investment decisions and margin trading.
There's a multitude of reasons that cause the gap in assets between the customer balances and what's there today and what we hope to gain. It can't be pinpointed just on losses on trading activity.
The reason I'm asking, and I'm just kind of narrowing it down because my time is expiring, but it's important for us to very clearly understand what caused this collapse. When we had the 2008 financial crisis and Bear Stearns collapsed and Lehman Brothers collapsed, we could have gone in there and we could have pointed to all these different reasons that could potentially have contributed to it, but the underlying reasons were there was a subprime crisis and a lack of liquidity in these respective institutions. That allowed us to have a policy response, a regulatory response to prevent that kind of thing from occurring in the future. The FTX collapse right now is just FTX, but are these lack of controls and are these environments that resulted in the FTX collapse, are those still existing today, and could the same thing happen in similar operations such as Binance, for example? Could they also engage in the same activities under the current regulatory regime, and if things go wrong, have the same outcome?
And none of it would be relevant to you apart from Binance.us.
3 points I'd make. First of all, we are going to detail the sources and uses and what happened to all the funds. That will tell us exactly, how the losses were incurred. Some of those may be lessons learned. Some of them just, frankly, will just be payments that were made, from other people's money. It's
just going back to my question, though, Mr. Ray. The circumstances that led to FTX's collapse, those circumstances still exist in the crypto space, and can other companies collapse in a similar set of circumstances?
Okay.
Well, certainly we've ceased trading, so it won't happen at our company. Could it happen at other companies? I can't speak to them because I don't know how each of these companies are operated. Obviously, our company operated in a very distinct way that led to losses, but I think every company is different.
My time's expired.
And I do
Gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Hill, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. I appreciate you being here, Mr. Ray. Glad to have you before the committee. And I want to thank the ranking member, Mr. McHenry, and the Chair Waters, for working constructively in the digital asset space over the past 4 years. And I want to remind my colleagues that Mr. McHenry talked about bond rip-offs in the railroad expansion in the 1870s and 1880s. True. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac leading us down the Primrose path in the early 2000s on housing ownership in the secondary market. And there were frauds and fraudulent actors. But that didn't mean that we didn't want to invest in railroads in the United States for the history of the country, and it didn't mean that we don't need a vigorous single-family housing market and secondary market in our country. So let's not confuse the malfeasance and disgusting activity of FTX with the fact that we need a proper, thoughtful regulatory oversight of digital assets. And so I thank Chair Waters and Ranking Member McHenry. 14 years ago this week, Bernie Madoff was arrested and charged with operating the largest Ponzi scheme in American history. Its collapse injured 37,000 investors and led to major reforms at the Securities and Exchange Commission and their oversight, and FINRA. Bankman-Fried was arrested in the Bahamas last night. In many ways, the fall of FTX dwarfs that of Bernie Madoff, with court filings suggesting that over 1 million creditors are somewhere in the lurch in the FTX silos. Americans were hurt, and I want everyone listening to know in today's hearing that this is just the first step that Congress is taking in understanding what happened and how to create the appropriate regulatory environment. We do want to understand the events and decisions that led to the collapse and the impact on our customers and other market participants and how to prevent it from happening again. Mr. Ray, thanks for stepping up in your leadership capacity. And in looking at the bankruptcy filing, Prager Metis was the audit firm for the .com silo. Their website says they're the first ever CPA firm in the metaverse. So looking at their website, they have 24 offices, 600 staff, 100 partners, principally California, New York, and New Jersey. You stated you're not familiar with Prager Metis, is that correct?
That's correct.
Are they cooperating with your, in your role as bankruptcy trustee?
We're reaching out to, both firms, audit firms, as well as the firm that does our taxes, and we certainly have tools available if they don't cooperate, but everyone seems to be cooperating at this point.
And are they, you anticipate they'll actively participate in the forensic accounting work you're doing with Ernst & Young?
Absolutely not. No, we are taking information that we get from the prior auditors and accountants and tax professionals, and then we're going to take our investigation from there on an independent basis.
Can you tell us who the partner in charge is of the audit at that firm?
I can't tell you. I can't tell you off the top of my head.
Is it Jerry Etel, Brian Goldblatt, Michael Williams? Those names ring a bell?
No, it's not. I can get I can get your staff.
Would you provide that to us, please?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. And then the second auditing firm, Manino, you say you are familiar with them, and that's part of a London-based firm, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And so do you feel the same way about their performance based on the books and records you've seen, that they also were inadequate in serving as an auditing firm?
I don't want to, certainly don't want to disparage that firm. We do have to look through the books and records and look at the audits themselves and see how comprehensive they were, to see if the audit would have picked up anything that we see. And certainly we're going to look at the related party disclosures that are in those audits, whether there's any footnotes or exceptions. We need to go, we need to go back and look at all those audits just from a look-back perspective to determine what maybe could have been done that wasn't done.
Do you anticipate the United States being a creditor in these proceedings, either for tax purposes?
It's premature to tell. I mean, we're certainly looking at that ourselves, and to the extent that we find any irregularities in the tax area, we'll certainly be notifying the IRS, but nothing we've seen at this point. But again, our investigation is so early.
You state that the internal controls were the weakest that you've seen sort of in your experience, but FTX US and FTX.com, essentially there is no distinction between those. And so whether you were an international investor or a domestic investor, it's all the same pot. Is that fair to say?
I mean, that is certainly our worry. I mean, there's a limited amount of U.S. customers in the .com exchange, but we are focused on, commingling, and we're worried that, that the silos weren't respected for purposes of the crypto assets.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Himes, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on National Security, International Development, and Monetary Policy, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Ray, for being here and for undertaking this remarkably complicated task. At the end of the day, our job here is to learn from the mistakes that were made, who made them, and what we can do going forward. Like it or not, we're moving into a crypto assets, crypto world, and we really do need to learn. This whole thing has the feeling of a Hollywood blockbuster. That's why the cameras are here, right? We've got a 30-year-old gazillionaire who raised billions of dollars, living in some condo with a bunch of young people, exotic products, tokens, and crypto assets. It feels to me, though, as I look through particularly the SDNY indictment unsealed this morning, that a lot of what we're seeing here is as old as the hills. It's wire fraud. It's misleading investors. It's commingling of funds. This is as old as the hills. There is something that I really do want to ask you about, though, which is a little different here. All the good work you've done with other companies, you were dealing with, by and large, money in banks or in other financial institutions. Here we've got tokens, which evidently were things of, quote, value, valued in some way or another, that were used as collateral, living in places called wallets, not in banks. So my question for you, that feels to me like what's exotic and different about this. How much more challenging is your job going to be because you're now operating in a world of tokens and wallets as opposed to dollars and banks? And what might, I know you're hesitant to get into regulatory questions, but what should we be thinking about, if nothing else, to help with more smooth unwindings of the inevitable bankruptcies that will occur in this industry moving forward?
The principal issue that the company is facing in the crypto area. I mean, it is from a technology perspective, it is different from the other bankruptcies because it is a
Best part of the
it's
stream.
not a plane, not a boat. It's this crypto asset, and it has inherently some difficulties. The assets can be taken or lost. We have
Eco Dave.
assets that are in what are called hot wallets, and those are in cold wallets. Hot wallets are very vulnerable to hacking. If you've done any looking on the internet, you'll find that hacking is almost ordinary course in this business sector. There are lots of vulnerability to the wallets. So this company, unfortunately, had a very, very challenging record here. For some, transfers, there was no pathway for it.
I think the majority of this is actually
our
USD.
keys aren't stored
anyway,
in a
terms of
centralized
embezzlement.
location.
I think.
We don't know where all of our wallets are.
Buy assets in the Bahamas, aren't they?
Passwords were sometimes kept in just plain text format. So this company was sort of uniquely positioned to fail. The lack of discipline on control of the wallets, their
Apparently
storage.
QuickBooks stock is up 6%.
The storage of passwords, allowing multiple users to set up accounts, almost created an environment where there was not a complete inventory of wallets. You can learn some lessons from that. I mean, you need to have more controls, more discipline, more centralized
Like his
accounting
answers.
functions.
It's not
more
get a bank
oversight and
account, stop using
management.
crypto. It's use better infrastructure.
That's not to say that things won't happen. The hacking might occur.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Ray. I have
feel like how
one
he's
more
not trying to
question,
throw
but I
crypto
really
under the
appreciate
bus.
that. We
This
got to
is
follow
really,
up on that because that's
really
something
big,
for us to
in all
do.
honesty.
The other thing that I can't stop thinking about here is, again, 30-year-old gazillionaire.
About how
I
they
get
tell
it,
them
all
to shut up,
sorts
but
of
they're not giving
attractive
the answer that
things.
they want.
Some of the supposedly smartest money on the planet, venture capitalists who are paid tens of millions of dollars to invest money, and maybe I wouldn't care if it was just the money of the very wealthy, but they're investing pension money. They're investing university endowments, companies like Lightspeed, Sequoia, Greylock, the best of the best invested in this. And you told us, you made a statement that this was the worst governance, the worst you had ever seen. Did you see any evidence of any appreciable due diligence on the part of these entities that gave Sam Bankman-Fried hundreds of millions of dollars?
Yeah, I'm not aware of what these parties may have done in terms of their due diligence. It is surprising, obviously, in light of all the circumstances. But I don't know what they did internally to verify these investments. So, well, obviously, only they know that.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Yield back.
The gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Emmer, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Ray, like everyone else. We're appreciative of you being here today and testifying. I'm going to start, for my part, with a series of quick questions that hopefully will assist this committee's investigation, and then I want to move on to some additional points, time permitting. Mr. Ray, there were over 100 corporate entities within FTX Group. Some had boards of directors and others did not. Was there a group-level board of directors overseeing the entirety of FTX?
No, there was not.
Would you agree that it's a bad decision for a complex firm like FTX to not have a top-level board of directors?
Yes.
Do you have concerns about the concentration of power in a small group of inexperienced individuals with
Cash
no
in your wallet?
oversight?
Yes.
Crypto in your wallet?
Did FTX.com have basic corporate functions like an accounting or human resource department?
No.
Was there a legal department at FTX.com?
Yes, there was.
Was there a compliance department?
I've been signed out of YouTube.
There were people with titles.
Fair enough. And thank you. To assist the committee's investigation, would you agree that a financial firm the size of FTX needs accounting, human resources, legal, compliance, and risk departments to help prevent something like this from happening?
Absolutely.
In early April 2022, FTX and IEX announced a strategic partnership. Last week, the Financial Times reported on Alameda's venture capital portfolio, which listed FTX Trading's $270 million investment into IEX as a, quote, acquisition. Did FTX Trading acquire IEX? And if not, what type of investment did FTX Trading make into IEX?
I'd have to get back to the committee on that specific investment. I'm not sure that was completed.
Can you provide us with some information on it?
Absolutely, I can get back to you on the staff on that.
We know that Chair Gensler had more meetings with FTX than anyone else in the crypto industry. We understand that what was being negotiated was a framework for digital asset exchange registration and token registration with the SEC that would benefit both parties. It would expand the SEC's jurisdiction in exchange for the SEC's preferential treatment of FTX over other industry participants. We understand there was a lot of activity to move this idea forward, including the circulation of draft short-form disclosures that would enable filers to get tokens listed on this newly formed bespoke exchange. Mr. Ray, I know you're handicapped with the information you currently have obtained, but Chair Gensler refuses to answer our questions or testify before this committee. Will you commit to sharing with this committee any internal documents you come across regarding communication between FTX and Mr. Gensler or others at the SEC?
We'll fully cooperate, with the committee and the regulatory authorities with respect to our investigation.
Again, specifically, I just want copies, that this committee will want copies of those communications to the extent they exist.
We can certainly work with your staff to get you what you need.
Thank you. And Mr. Ray, I appreciate you mentioning your concerns in the beginning of my questioning about the concentration of power in a small group of individuals with no oversight. That is the exact problem that open and permissionless technology like crypto and blockchain solve. It solves for the problems of centralization. You stated in your testimony that you've never seen such a, quote, utter failure of corporate controls at every level of an organization, from the lack of financial statements to a complete failure of any internal controls or governance whatsoever, close quote. FTX had disastrous or even non-existent systems for accounting, audit, cash management, cybersecurity, human resources, risk management, and other unacceptable management practices that currently make your job to uncover the facts quite difficult. Fortunately, the immutable characteristics of public blockchains that some people would care not to understand in this committee allowed the crypto community to reveal Sam Bankman-Fried's fraud, and the on-chain public record will assist law enforcement moving forward. I encourage my colleagues to understand Sam Bankman-Fried's con for what it is: a failure of centralization, a failure of business ethics, and a crime. It is not a failure of technology. I've worked across the aisle since I came to Congress, so the future of crypto reflects American values, the same way the internet does today. For the most engaged members of Congress on crypto policy, the FTX collapse remind us of why we care so deeply about this technology. Decentralization is the point. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Caston, who is also the vice chair of the Subcommittee on Investor Protection, Entrepreneurship, and Capital Markets, is recognized.
The UX on the ledge is awful, though.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Ray, thank you so much for this. I'm struck by a lot here, not least Mr. Perlmutter's comment that this is going to take a long time to untangle. Maybe your comment to Mr. Lucas that this is a paperless bankruptcy saves you time because you run out of paper, but I appreciate your service. A bunch of questions. One, I just want to clarify because it's all been implicit. All this bankruptcy is dollar denominated, correct? So as you go through to chase down values?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I ask that because we've talked about commingling, we've talked about customer losses. There's been some public reporting suggesting that there may have been some inflation or misrepresentation of the value of FTT tokens. Is that, and I'm not asking you to opine on that right now, but to the extent there is some customer loss claimed from that, is that also one of the categories of losses you're going after?
Well, FTT, I'm sorry, was on that balance sheet of Alameda, and it certainly was served as effectively sort of collateral, and it was largely controlled by Alameda, so it was a very illiquid token. It was effectively a token created, by the company itself with a limited float. So, inherent in the token itself was the illiquidity, and certainly the size of the position the company had in its own token contributed to this problem.
But if a
SBF
customer
did
were to
speak
buy
about
that
this
token
in
at
his
some value
statement.
that because of its illiquidity could be manipulated, would the customer not effectively be
said
sitting
that
on, for lack of a
Ray
better word, a
claimed
Forex risk?
There'd been a
Well, there's
large
certainly,
minting of
all
FTT
the
tokens,
crypto,
and he said if you look on chain, there's
asset,
no evidence
has
of
a
it
certain
at all.
volatility to it, and some are more volatile than others, and FTT was very volatile.
Sure, and I'm just, to the extent that the volatility is natural, it's fine. To the extent it's manipulated, separate. Let me move on because we're close on time. There's been, in a number of the public conversations that Sam Bankman-Fried has had, when asked about commingling, he often
Stated a
responds by
dilutive
talking about
minting of
open
approximately
margin
300 million
positions.
FTT tokens by unauthorized source.
I want to just
after
give you a
petition
chance to
date.
react to the
No
difference
such
between an
minting
open
as
margin
Block's lawyers
position
would
and the
confirm.
commingling that you've observed.
I'm not sure exactly, I tried to follow some of what his statements were, and it was very, very hard to really understand what he was really trying to say. I mean, we do know that they had, open margin positions at various times in Alameda, and Alameda was a customer, if you will, of the exchange, and it's through that customer relationship, plus other arrangements, that allowed Alameda to borrow those funds and then take positions on the exchange like anyone, who had hedged, an asset in the market. He had unusually large positions, of course, and sometimes they were wrong in those positions, and they resulted in big losses. But ultimately, the commingling issue is the same and a different issue. He took the money from FTX to cover those positions, and ultimately, when customers went to get their money back from .com, there was a run on the bank.
Okay. On November 12th, I guess just the second day,
I think the really
first day you
interesting
were
thing they're
there,
going to ignore here
there was
is
a
that run
hacker
on the bank
who stole some
greater
$477 million
than
worth of
what would
tokens
happen
from
on a traditional
FTX.
bank.
There was a November 29th interview.
What I really like to know
with
is
Mr.
what percentage of
Bankman-Fried
funds
with Tiffany Fong when he
that
said he's
the
narrowed it
exchange
down
held
to like
were
8
attempted
people.
to be withdrawn.
Quote.
That's the question we actually need answering.
Have you had any
Because, say, Northern
discussions
Rock in
with
the
him?
UK
Do you have any
collapsed after
sense of
5%.
where, do you have any more
Because
visibility
banks
since
use
November
fractional
12th?
reserve banking. They only need to
On
hold
that
around
hack?
10%.
Have
or
you had conversations
12%,
with him
something
about who
like
those
that.
8 people might be? Is that?
BlockFi ran
What's
into
your-
exactly this problem. They
Florence,
only held
everything-
10%
I've
on the
not had any
exchange.
conversations with him. We're
And then get
relying
risky stuff
on
with it.
forensic and
Others do risky
cybersecurity
stuff with it, so they
experts
never get the money back.
who are tracking the crypto. It is an open, an open interface, so you can see, you can ultimately find where the crypto ends up. We've had law enforcement involved, so we're tracking it. I think we've got all the help we need in that front.
Okay.
Yeah, you can track it unlike cash.
As I get close on the end of my
which
time
just disappears. Put it in a duffel bag.
So far, it seems like most of the losses have been within these 4 silos, and I mean, 2.7 million customers, whatever that means, is some exposure. Are you worried about any broader contagion? Are there broader contagion issues we should worry about from our perspective here? I mean, certainly other bankruptcies of the scale have spilled into other sectors.
Look, I think the industry, we've made a number of investments in the crypto sector. If you look at that portfolio of $5 billion, one of our major investments, top 20 investments were in the crypto sector. So it's a very trying time for the crypto sector, and what I worry about is the impairment to that portfolio of $5 billion, because obviously that's a recovery pool for our customers.
Thank you. Yield back.
Oh, it's him.
The gentleman from New York,
I was
Mr.
wondering where that
Zeldin, is
noise
now
came
recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Ray, I know you referenced earlier that you had not yet read Sam Bankman-Fried's testimony that was prepared for today. I had a question that I wanted to ask, and I was going to read you something that he had included in his remarks. In late 2021, I believe that Alameda Research likely had a net asset value of substantially over $50 billion market to market. I believe that Alameda was likely leveraged long, perhaps about 1.1 times leverage. That is, it had corresponding assets for roughly 90% of its position, borrowing the remaining 10%. That was roughly 1/20th of the maximum leverage FT allowed and roughly 1/3 of the leverage assumed by the average FT margin trader. In early November 2022, over a 3-day period, the market value of assets that Alameda Research had held declined dramatically, I believe, by more than 50%. Have you yet seen any evidence of a market value drop in Alameda's assets before November 2022?
We haven't gone back to trace, you know, the actual, I mean, to compare his statements with what actually happened in the marketplace. I mean, clearly there was volatility and a huge market drop in crypto over that 12-month period.
Let me do it for you right now.
So it wouldn't surprise me that,
literally.
You know, his leverage numbers changed
Let's do it right now.
dramatically during that time period.
There you go.
I think the problem at the heart of this
Let's go
is
back.
that, you know, his positions, you know, the collateral he had behind that, he didn't have the same auto liquidation provision that a margin account would normally have.
Yes.
You usually can't lose, you know, if it's structured properly, you shouldn't be able to lose more than your collateral.
This is the tether contract?
Otherwise, the position closes out and there's no harm. And the brokerage firm, you know, if it's a brokerage account, for example, they wouldn't be short cash. They wouldn't have to go out to get the money from you. You close out the position. None of that existed with the Alameda positions. They had almost
So
a
it
complete
peaked before
ability
Bitcoin.
to lose money beyond their collateral.
Are you yet in a position
had
to
a
be
second
able
rally
to
when Bitcoin peaked,
describe,
and then it
summarize
declined
the assets that Alameda
65%.
had?
So yes,
We do have
yes,
an
the value
inventory
had
of
declined by about 65%. However,
the
it
investments
then
we
knows,
made,
but then
it's
similar
pretty
to
clear we've
market,
got
it then
those in
went
the
down
hands of,
95%.
our investment
There you
bankers
go.
in
There's your
Palo
answer,
Alto
John
trying
Ray.
to
Why is it
understand
taking
those
you so long
investments.
to go through?
Ultimately, we'll market those investments. You'll see this week that some of those investments will be put up for sale. The crypto assets, a little bit different. What's
Ooh,
on the
assets up for sale.
exchanges we can see. There's exchanges, about 24 exchanges across the world where we know we have crypto assets. They're in our name. We're securing those and removing those into cold storage. We have, you know, other positions in cold wallets and hot wallets. We've got visibility to that. The question really is, are there wallets that we don't know about? Certainly that is the
Don't worry,
potential,
Angela, it's
because the
been
way this
dull as
company was
anything.
organized, there
We
may
all
be
leaving. I mean, I
wallets
even left for a bit.
that
This is
don't have our
really dull.
names,
There's
we don't know
nothing
where they are.
of note,
and
massively.
that's going to be, you know, a difficult task ahead of us. But what we can see and what we have visibility to, we're grabbing control over.
There'll be an article on the site later
So we'll
on.
learn
I think
more
Josh is
this
writing
week.
it up.
We should learn more in the
Give you the
coming
overview.
weeks.
Mr. Ray, you mentioned the documentation that you don't have earlier during your testimony. Can you share what documents you have uncovered with respect to the transfer of funds from FTX to Alameda?
It's voluminous, you know.
Voluminous?
You know, the record keeping,
Good word.
you know, wasn't
Word
very
of the
clean
day.
in the company, but we should be able to trace the movement of crypto assets. I mean, inherently in the nature of the crypto, you should be able to see the movement and where it started and where it ended up.
Yeah,
We'll
'cause
obviously track,
blockchain
the
is
banking
transparent.
information. We do have bank records. Sometimes we have to go right to the source, right to the bank to get historical records because they're not, you know, on
Oh,
in
for sure,
hand, if
Dave.
you will,
I mean,
at the company.
I'm not surprised.
But,
And
but
I'm
one
not
way or another,
offended.
we'll get the banking
Say,
records and
I
we'll be able
will
to trace the
leave.
sources of
It's not me.
cash, how that cash was utilized to buy assets. Once we can identify the assets, we can then trace the asset from either, you know, transfer to other currencies or ultimate, you know, payment outside the company. So it's just a very intense forensic process, but we'll have the records ultimately to do that.
We'd be interested in receiving more detailed explanation of the documents that you have. And one last question, can you describe what documents you identified with respect to internal controls and governance?
Well, there isn't any, you know, to speak of. I mean, the company is virtually void of any internal controls or documentation. Resolutions are absent. Authorizations approving massive loans, for example, the loans of the insiders. I haven't seen any resolutions approving those. When Sam Bankman-Fried signs on behalf of the company and then he signs his own loan, that should tell you a lot right there.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Meeks, who is also the chair of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And
Am I still
Mr. Ray,
live?
it's, thank you for your testimony here today. You know, if you've been a member of Congress as long as I have been, you know, it just seems eerily it was you that had to take over Enron when I was sitting here at that particular time. And we were looking at that as being one of the biggest scandals that we've ever seen. And now, I believe in your testimony today, you said this may be even bigger, of which is really concerning to me, particularly since, you know, I do believe that blockchain technologies have a role and fostering
Hey.
financial inclusion that facilitates cross-border transactions.
Hey.
But what we didn't have and what we don't have are the real safeguards against misuse by bad actors. As
Well,
a
yeah, but
result
again,
of that, I know
this isn't a crypto
I've been
problem.
intricately involved with
not a crypto problem.
New York State. And New York State was
Crypto
one
couldn't
of
solve
the
it.
first nations to create a virtual currency
DEX.
license and supervisory framework.
Allow for
And so,
force cold
in
storage
your
of
testimony,
assets.
you were very frank about the
Require there to be
total
smart
lack of
contracts that
internal
force funds into
controls in
cold
FTX
storage that
and
have to be
critical of their
audited
governance
by
structure.
a government
So,
regulatory
I guess my
body
first question to you,
to
in your
ensure that the
estimation,
funds will
how much
definitely
did
go
the
into cold
lack
storage. There you
of
go.
the board of directors
Boom. Done your
attribute
regulation
to
for
the
you.
failure of FTX? And do you believe there would have been an opportunity to change course if this defunct structure were identified early on?
Yes, I do. I think that the lack of an independent board was a critical aspect of the failure.
And also in New York State, there are capitalization requirements
Rick and Morty is my
for
favorite show.
licensee holders to have highly liquid capital to ensure that financial integrity and to protect against outside shocks. Now, in this instance, how would a capital requirement have changed the outcome of the FTX failure?
Yeah, I'm not a regulatory expert. I mean, what I've set forth in my testimony is that I think it's important for customer accounts to be segregated and for there to be transparency in what people can visualize in their account, and to have some strict rules relative to using customer assets. That's the extent of my views about the regulatory scheme. I defer to others who are obviously more experienced on the regulatory side.
That's one of the issues that we're trying to deal here is how do we get the appropriate and the proper regulation so that we can make sure that individuals are protected. For example, do you know and to what extent were U.S. persons trading on the FTX exchange? And do you believe that the controls were adequate in restricting access for U.S. persons? Because, FTX.com was listed in the Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And despite it being publicly reported that the U.S. subsidiary was a stronger position than its parent because of the narrowed offerings and oversights, there still seemed to be this direction toward U.S. persons. So what do you think? Do you think that there should be, or the restricting access for U.S. persons or the controls were adequate?
Well, certainly there was a limited number of people that invested on the .com, which was not the intended use of that exchange. How that happened, obviously, we'll have to investigate, and where the breakdown was, internally in our controls that would have allowed that to happen.
So I'd like, at some point, I know you're not a regulatory expert, but, to have conversation with you about and looking at some of the rules and the regulations that we put in place in the state of New York, because the debate that we have here at times is ceilings and floors and what would be appropriate to make sure that people are protected. You've already stated that FTX's lack of internal controls is unlike anything that you've ever seen in your career, and obviously has had a devastating impact on people who have trusted FTX with their savings and investments. I also chair the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and I'm also concerned that these internal failures could have led to sanction evasion and illegal transactions on FTX's platform at a time when sanctions compliance is critical for supporting countries like Ukraine and slowing down Putin's war machine. Have you and your team investigated these issues since taking the helm at FTX about anyone trying to avoid sanctions?
We're certainly investigating all the aspects of the failure, and as the coming weeks we'll learn more, and I think we'll certainly be willing to work with the committee to understand really what happened and share with you to the extent possible.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Loudermilk, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ray, thank you for being here today. Unfortunately, we aren't able to question Sam Bankman-Fried.
Because you arrested him.
I was looking forward to that, and however, I was concerned that you were going to testify first. I would have rather have had him testify first so we could qualify some of the statements that he may make with you, who's in the current position. However, since we've been in here, there's been a leak of what was to be his testimony that has come out. And I'd like to ask you about something that he has related in his testimony. He said if he had not been arrested ahead of today's hearings, that he alleges that FTX US has been and remains solvent and could pay off all of its customers tomorrow. Given the evidence you have and what you've gathered, is there any degree of truth to this claim?
We still have a hole in the U.S. So it's, as we sit here today, it is not solvent. That's just inaccurate, and I'm not sure how would you even know that, quite honestly. So we're hopeful because the number of customers and the volume of trading on the U.S. exchange was much smaller than .com, somewhat driven by the number of withdrawals that took place before the bankruptcy on the U.S. silo. But right now we have a few $100 million of value. Again, you have to look at value as of, say, today.
Right.
Still missing. We haven't ultimately, though, found all the keys to the wallets. As we find and open those wallets, hopefully we'll be able to find more assets.
All the keys.
And if we can attribute those to the U.S. silo, certainly there's a pathway to recovery there. And so, really the case isn't closed yet on the U.S. It's just premature, to make a determination such as his.
So there is a potential that what he is claiming is true, but so I guess that would be the reason why all of the assets in those wallets have been frozen on the U.S. side. My follow-up question would be, if they are solvent, why would we freeze those? And along with that, is there any evidence of commingling of funds between FTX.com, FTX US, or Alameda, or any of the three together?
That's what we have. That's what we're looking at right now. I can't, give you a clear answer on that today. We're looking, when we open up all the wallets, we look where the source is from whence they came. We'll have an answer for you, but it's just much too early to tell you that.
I appreciate that, but summarizing, there's not evidence right now that his statement would be true that FTX US is completely solvent.
Well, clearly not.
Okay. And something else that he did previously, he stated that the Bahamian regulators, he gave the Bahamian regulators a one-day advance warning to allow investors in the Bahamas to withdraw their funds. No one else outside the Bahamas was able to withdraw funds before the bankruptcy was filed. Mr. Freed said that he allowed the withdrawals because, quote, it was critical to the exchange to be able to have a future because that's where I am right now. And you do not want to be in a country with a lot of angry people in it. Is this explanation accurate?
Well, here's what we know. I can't speak to his words. What we do know is the liquidation proceeding in the Bahamas was filed effectively 24 hours before our Chapter 11 proceeding. During that time period, and we've documented this in our court filings as of last night, the accounts were unfrozen just in the Bahamas. Over $100 million was released to approximately 1,500 customers in the Bahamas.
Did you say 15 million or 15
100 million.
100 million.
To 1,500 customers approximately. Okay. These are approximate numbers.
Okay.
And then the door was closed about the time of our Chapter 11 filing. And there were communications between Mr. Bankman-Fried and the Bahamian government specifically related to this leakage of assets.
So Mr. Freed would have known that the bankruptcy filing was imminent when he did this?
Yes, he was certainly in discussions with his counsel, who was in discussions with the debtor's counsel.
All right. I see my time is quickly running out. Thank you for what you're doing and trying to recover what assets we can. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Gottheimer, who is also the Vice Chair of the Subcommittee on National Security, International Development, and Monetary Policy, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for convening this hearing. Since 2019, I have raised concern about the Securities and Exchange Commission's approach to digital assets SEC Chairman Gensler has repeatedly claimed that most cryptocurrencies are covered by existing securities laws. Despite that, the SEC has not proposed a single rule to create guardrails for digital assets and has done a haphazard job of overseeing the space. The result has been a lack of certainty and clear rules of the road, and we are seeing the impact of that front and center today. They failed to do their job, and they failed to protect consumers, in my opinion. I've been calling on with other members on financial regulators to step up and create clear guardrails for digital assets. Nearly a year ago, I drafted the Stablecoin Innovation and Protection Act to create tough consumer protections and prevent destabilizing runs like we saw with the so-called stablecoin Terra that failed earlier this year. I also invited Chairman Rosenbaum to my district to discuss the clear regulatory steps the CFTC could take to better protect consumers and prevent thieves and snake oil salesmen from ripping off Americans with worthless digital assets. I've consistently been engaging with all market participants, associations, and regulators to promote innovation and the responsible development of promising financial technology, all with a clear eye to protect consumers. Instead of writing clear rules and guidelines for digital asset firms, however, the SEC has created a patchwork of ad hoc policies for crypto firms purely through spotty enforcement actions and random letters, haphazard enforcement that has missed the worst offenders. You can't regulate through a random patchwork of letters. You have to write clear rules of the road, which is what I've been calling on for years now. Chairman Gensler has told our committee and stated publicly that he has the authority he needs to oversee this industry. Yet the SEC hasn't written rules and has failed to foresee and prevent disasters in the industry and protect consumers, from Terra Luna to FTX. It's time for the SEC to step up and do its job, or another regulator should take the lead. Mr. Ray, thank you for being here. Do you think U.S. financial regulators would have been satisfied with the accounting and risk mitigation practices that were in place at FTX International to prevent its failure from spilling over to FTX US and American investors?
Again, as I said on the record, I can't, speak to what the regulatory fix is here. Obviously, oversight is needed. Obviously, we need to have customers have to have control over their accounts, and clearly there's some needs here. I can't really specify what they might be, and I leave that to the committee to obviously work with the agencies to.
FTX's group's U.S.-based crypto derivatives and clearing platform LedgerX, that has been overseen by the CFTC since 2017, was not included in FTX's wider bankruptcy filing, and according to your initial review of the situation, LedgerX is still solvent. During his testimony before the Senate Agriculture Committee last week, Chairman Benham argued that it was the oversight of his agency that ensured LedgerX was insulated from the failure of other FTX firms. From what you've seen, what protected LedgerX from the failures of the broader FTX ecosystem, and what could U.S. regulators, including the SEC, have done to protect Americans using FTX US?
Certainly, we believe LedgerX, it is a regulated entity and it is solvent, and the customer accounts are segregated, and obviously that goes a long way to protecting customers.
Do you believe that Mr. Bankman-Fried, when he says that all FTX US users will receive a dollar on the dollar return of funds at the end of these bankruptcy proceedings?
That's very speculative at this point.
What are some of the biggest questions you still have for Mr. Bankman-Fried and his associates, now that you've been through this for some period?
Look, I think the questions we have are not necessarily questions for Mr. Fried. The questions we have are, where are the assets? How we locate those assets? It's a mining exercise at this point, and look, at the end of the day,
the real crypto
we're not
mining,
going to be able to recover all the losses here, right? Money was spent that we'll never get back. There will be losses on the international side. We're hopeful on the U.S. side. He'll answer to others related to what happened here. Our job is just to, find the assets and try to get customers their money back as quickly as possible.
When do you expect that to be?
It's these bankruptcies take time. The assets will take time to locate. The process will, as I say, will take months, not weeks. But we try to do this in the most expeditious way possible.
Thank you for being here. I yield back.
The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Davidson, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Ray, thanks for what you're doing to recover funds that are missing, and for helping us build the evidence trail to find out, what happened. I think a lot of people look at your initial statements and you say, we know the following. First, customer assets from FTX.com were commingled with assets from the Alameda trading platform. Second, Alameda used funds to engage in margin trading, which exposed customer funds to massive losses. Based on your review of the records, is the transfer of customer funds from FTX.com to Alameda Research in conflict with the FTX.com terms of service?
Yes, that's my view.
Right, so they claim that they weren't supposed to be able to trade those funds, and clearly they traded those funds.
I think that, you know, the difference in what you may be hearing is that, you know, unlike generally customer accounts, the Alameda account had no trading limitations. So, you know, virtually unlimited positions they could take.
Right, so when customers deposited funds into their FTX accounts, where did the cash go?
Well, sometimes the money wasn't deposited in the FTX account, it was sent to Alameda to begin with, so.
So it was misdirected from the start, straight to Alameda.
There was certainly some time period where there's no bank account at .com, and then ultimately, you know, if you look at the structure of this, Alameda was essentially a customer on that .com exchange, and effectively, you know, borrowed money from, or just transferred money from FTX customers to take its own positions on the Alameda hedge fund.
Right, so at times it was just going straight to Alameda. At other times, did you uncover a path where there was some sort of settlement, like in stocks where there's T+2, where there was settlement back and forth between FTX and Alameda?
Ultimately, when we look at this, I mean, there is going to be, you know, I'm sure thousands and thousands of trades, right? So we're going to have to go back and do a very detailed analysis about every single.
But they didn't have a structured settlement framework at all in any of their software or accounting systems?
It doesn't appear so, no.
Okay, and have you ever done bankruptcies where you had to deal with custody of stocks?
Yes.
Yeah, so, you know, obviously there you settle, clearly you own shares or you don't own shares. You take custody of the shares normally after a 2-day settlement period. There's a netting period where firms that trade in these net out and settle the position at the end of the day. It doesn't seem any of this kind of thing existed for FTX.
That's one of the findings. There was no reconciliation of the ledger on a day-to-day basis.
Was there anything that you could, have you detected a point in time where the assets on hand for this enterprise matched the amount of customer deposits?
We'd have to go back and look at that. I mean, we're looking at a timeline. You know, we're going to have to back up from the petition date. My guess would be you'd have to back up for more than a year, and then we'll look at, you know, on a day-to-day basis. Again, they didn't reconcile ledger on a day-to-day basis. We've got to now do that to find the answer to your question.
Okay, so custody really seems to be one of the big things here. Clearly, they didn't have a way to reconcile custody on behalf of their customers. But sometimes when people were saying, boy, you know, I don't know about this, maybe I'm going to take my funds out. Let's say somebody bought Bitcoin and now they want to exit with custody of Bitcoin and have self-custody. Is that the point in time when FTX or some combination of these entities acquired the Bitcoin so that they could deliver what the customer was requesting?
Well, there's a certain amount of liquidity at a point in time. I think the problem happened when there was effectively a run on the bank and there was just less assets there than the depositors effectively would require to be drawn out. Underscoring that is a commingling of those assets even amongst the customers themselves. So it's just really one pot of crypto, if you will.
Right. Okay, so no control, no custody. And the only real safeguard the individual consumer had as this was unwinding was the hope that they could somehow be one of the lucky people that decided to say, I'm going to take possession and self-custody my own digital asset. Those people, if they've exited and they have custody of the assets, are their assets now safe?
Well, you're exactly on point. I mean, if we could all be as lucky as the Bahamian customers who got the money out.
All right, thank you. My time's expired. I yield.
The gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Presley, who is also the vice chair of the Subcommittee on Consumer Protection and Financial Institutions, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and thank you to our chairwoman for making this hearing an absolute priority. due to the collapse of the cryptocurrency exchange FTX, over 1 million people have not been made whole, including consumers in my district, the Massachusetts 7th. Now, Mr. Ray, in a bankruptcy filing a few weeks ago, you stated, quote, "Never in my career have I seen such a complete failure of corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information as occurred here," end quote. So that we can continue to get a better sight line into this failure. Can you elaborate on the internal failures and the inadequate policies that occurred at FTX leading to the collapse?
You know, it's virtually, unlimited in terms of the lack of controls. No centralized records on banking, no daily reconciliations of crypto assets, silos where there's no insurance, inadequate insurance, no independent board.
Yeah,
no
I've got
safeguards that
a
limit
call in
who controls an
about
asset.
an hour, so I'm going to have to.
So senior
turn off my
management
camera
literally
and
could
mute my mic
get
just to
access
finish
to
off this.
any of the accounts,
Thanks everyone for watching.
any of
I
the
think it's probably
silos.
just Dave left at this point. It's pretty
no
dull.
separateness between customer
Yeah, there'll be
money
a full
and other customer money or
workup of
other-
this on
other
our
assets.
site if we need to.
It's virtually unlimited in terms of the lack of controls. And that's really the point of the unprecedented comment. I've just never seen anything like it in all 40 years of doing restructuring work and corporate legal work. It's just a dearth of information.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ray, for enumerating that for the purposes of the record to better understand the depth of the incompetence here. And again, really just egregious and really criminal. Can you tell us how customer funds were handled at FTX, including the exact amount that FTX misused?
We don't have
what that number is?
Yeah, we don't have totals today on the losses. I mean, we do know that the customer funds kind of existed effectively in a pool. We're going to have to do an accounting, a tracing analysis to really determine the number of customers affected. Right now, we have the number of accounts, but again, users had multiple accounts. For example, if they had a different trading position, they may have opened multiple accounts. We know it's a big number. It's in the millions on the customer accounts, and we know it's several $billion in losses. Assigning those losses to customer accounts will be our next challenge.
And I saw one report that was putting it at about $8 billion. In light of what is FTX's plan to make sure that every single dollar that was misused is returned to the customers, do you have an estimate of the amount of funds that FTX will actually be able to repay?
You know, not at this stage. I mean, the one thing that I want to express to the committee is that, you know, every day we find more assets, we unlock more assets. We find, you know, keys that we can then unlock wallets, and then we assign those to the proper silos. So every day we're more encouraged, but clearly, you know, we anticipate, you know, some massive losses here. We're just too early right now to speculate what that would be. And hopefully, you know, in the coming weeks, we will get a better handle on that and obviously make more information available to the public. The one thing about the bankruptcy process, which should be comforting to the committee, is that there's absolute transparency and disclosure in that. There's reporting in the bankruptcy process. So everyone will know every step of the way exactly what's happening in this bankruptcy.
Thank you. Without question, this collapse has been devastating to people across the globe, my constituents in the Mass 7th included, which is why it really is essential that we understand the anatomy of this collapse so that we can not only ensure that they are made whole, that we are mitigating the damage caused here, maximizing the value that is returned to customers, but that we ensure with stringent regulations and procedures in place that this does not happen in the future. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and I yield back.
Gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Budd, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
So the story of FTX is a story as old as time. What FTX engaged in, it's fraud, plain and simple. Sam Bankman-Fried, he lied to investors. He violated his own terms of service. He knowingly and improperly loaned $10 billion in customer funds to FTX from FTX to his own hedge fund. This is the stuff that would make Bernie Sanders cringe. Mr. Bankman-Fried is right where he belongs, arrested for fraud. And from where I sit, the number one priority right now is to make each and every investor financially whole. So thank you, Mr. Ray, for being here, for your efforts, and for lending your expertise today. So the bankruptcy filing, it notes several unacceptable practices, like the use of software to conceal the misuse of customer funds and Alameda's secret exemption from certain aspects of FTX.com's auto liquidation protocol. So can you expand on these practices and what more you've learned since the bankruptcy filing?
The basic concept is that Alameda was able to borrow on an unlimited basis, or transfer. I'm not sure I'd describe it. Borrowing is almost a technical term. So transfer of assets, borrowing of assets on an unlimited basis, which then it was allowed to take massive positions with other people's money. And because they had no auto liquidation feature, ultimately those losses could exceed the value of that account. So that's essentially what happened in a nutshell.
Thank you. So another question, if FTX.com were domiciled here in the U.S., do you think the outcome would have been the same?
The extent of the lack of controls and the way this business was operated, I don't think it would matter where this company was located.
So here's really what I'm getting at. So I've been a longtime supporter of both blockchain technology and the digital asset industry. I view them as uniquely American innovations that have the potential to help and revolutionize financial services. But what happened at FTX was fraud on a massive scale, not unlike other scams throughout our country's history. The head of FTX should be dealt with in the same way that other disgraced leaders of Enron, prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. So what I want to protect is innovation, and we want to see it flourish right here on our shores under proper regulatory oversight. So it's clear now more than ever that regulatory ambiguity coupled with a practice of regulation by enforcement used by agencies like the SEC, it's led to companies moving offshore, where they're often out of reach of proper American oversight, which puts all investors at risk of another FTX-type scam. So what we need is for Congress to take the lead and establish clear rules for this industry. From the very beginning of my time in Congress, I've introduced and supported countless bills that would do just that. And it's my hope that we can finally work together to establish these rules to protect U.S. investors and the future of American innovation. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman from New York, Mr. Torres, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To read the bankruptcy filing, one gets the impression that FTX had the corporate governance of a college fraternity. In the bankruptcy filing, you note that decisions about the disbursement of funds were made via an online chat with personalized emojis. And it seems to me corporate governance by emoji sounds like a recipe for the misuse of funds. During the New York Times Deal Book interview, Sam Bankman-Fried said that FTX and Alameda were, if not in intention, in effect, tied together more substantially than I wanted it to be. And Mr. Bankman-Fried speaks as if the conflict of interest came as a shock to him, as if it arose by accident or by mistake rather than by design. But it seems to me that Mr. Bankman-Fried set up a mutually beneficial relationship between Alameda and FTX. He would use Alameda as a market maker to generate liquidity and trading revenues for FTX, and then use FTX as a lender to generate leverage for Alameda. And that incestuous relationship was neither accidental nor incidental. That incestuous relationship was central to the crypto empire that Mr. Bankman-Fried built. Do you agree with that analysis? Or?
I can't take any exception to what you said.
And so do you think that Mr. Bankman-Fried knew or should have known that the conflict of interest would foreseeably culminate in the commingling of customer funds?
I certainly think he should have known his actions would result in the circumstances that we now find ourselves in. Absolutely.
When FTX was seeking a bailout, FTX circulated to investors a balance sheet whose largest assets were tokens that FTX itself had invented. The largest asset on the balance sheet were $2.2 billion in Serum tokens. The Serum token is a creation of FTX. And needless to say, the value of a Serum token depends on the value of FTX as a company. If FTX collapses, the token is worthless. It becomes no different from monopoly money. Do you agree that there's something fundamentally fraudulent about the practice of counting your own tokens as assets on your balance sheet?
Well, clearly, because of the way the token is created and the liquidity, it's a very very risky position to use your own asset effectively as collateral.
When I think of an asset, I think of something that has value independently of the company. Just like a corporation would not count its own stock as an asset, it seems to me no crypto company should count its own tokens as an asset, because if the company collapses, so does the token.
Well, in terms of tokens generally, I'm not really making a judgment about homegrown tokens. They're certainly out there in the marketplace. They trade. Limitations on the use of your own assets as collateral certainly seems inherently risky, and I suspect the customers themselves didn't realize that. So those are at least two problems.
FTX reportedly holds $900 million in liquid assets against $9 billion in liabilities. These are based on media reports. And it's been reported of the liquid assets, the largest among them is about $500 million in Robinhood stock. According to the Financial Times, the Robinhood shares are controlled by a foreign entity called Emergent Entity, which is said to be personally controlled by Sam Bankman-Fried. So the largest liquid asset, the Robinhood stocks, who controls it? Is it you as the FTX CEO or Sam Bankman-Fried?
Sam Bankman-Fried does not control that asset. That's an asset of the estate.
During the New York Times DealBook interview, Mr. Bankman-Fried said that he knew that there was a problem on November 6th, yet despite knowing what he knew on November 6th, on November 7th, he proceeded to tweet the following statement, quote, "FTX has enough to cover all client holdings," leading the public to believe that there was no problem. In your view, was he telling the truth or was he lying?
I don't want to give the dignity to his comments. He also said that he had $10 billion to invest in the company that day. So,
well, let me ask the question differently. At that time when he sent out the tweet, leading the public to believe that we have enough to cover all client holdings, did FTX actually have enough liquidity, enough assets to cover their liabilities?
Absolutely not.
So that statement was false?
Yes.
Okay. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Gonzalez, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Ray. I want to start with Alameda and some of the loans. So Alameda took out loans from various counterparties, is that correct? Not just FTX?
Yes.
Okay. To your knowledge, were any of those loans called?
We're going through the corporate history of what was repaid, and some of those loans, in fact, I think were repaid, but they had counterparty positions with a lot of those companies as well.
To your knowledge, were customer funds transferred from FTX to Alameda for the purposes of paying off called loans?
That's certainly possible. I mean, we need to investigate that further, but that's certainly one of the paths that we would potentially find.
Thank you. And then in your testimony, you described the use of computer infrastructure that gave individuals in senior management access to systems. I'll term this the backdoor, the quote backdoor that we've heard about. One of the things that Sam Bankman-Fried has said is he had no knowledge of commingling of funds. He said that multiple times. That backdoor, which you've said allowed for unlimited access of Alameda, essentially unlimited access into the FTX customer accounts to fund their investments. In your eyes, is there any way that Sam Bankman-Fried or senior management wouldn't know about this sort of thing?
No.
Thank you. Now shifting towards the goal of the bankruptcy proceeding, which is to find the assets and return those assets ASAP. I think that's the goal that we all share. part of that, of course, is having the data and a paper trail that will allow you to recreate transaction histories, figure out where the assets are so you can actually go get them. How would you characterize the quality of the record keeping at FTX and Alameda?
Well, ultimately, we hope, the raw data is there, and through the expertise that we have, we will be able to assemble it. It'll be time consuming because it's raw data. The jump start you normally have in companies, we just don't have. So we're starting in near zero.
Do you have any evidence that suggests that data was willfully destroyed prior to your arrival in the company?
We have imaged the Slack environment that the company had, but we are aware that there were certain forms of communications with disappearing messaging. So there's obviously risk of loss there.
Okay. One of the things in Mr. Bankman-Fried's testimony that has, I guess, leaked, that wasn't submitted, is he spends a considerable amount of time talking about Binance and how Binance effectively created a run on the bank, suggesting that, had that not occurred, FTX was solvent and would have been just fine. Prior to that episode, is your belief that FTX was solvent?
No.
I didn't think so either. That's pretty much all I have for questions. The one final thing I'll note, also in that testimony, there's some accountability, which is of course good, but then there's a lot of excuse making and some complaining. Like, in fact, many of us are still missing access to our own personal data, which is being held hostage by the Chapter 11 team's leadership. I would note that's what happens in life when you perpetrate a massive fraud and steal billions of dollars from your customers. You lose your freedom and you lose access to a whole bunch of things that otherwise you wish you would have. So just a simple reminder for everybody that that's what happens. Final question, actually, I do have one minute left. You've mentioned the $100 million that was transferred to 1,500 Bahamian accounts prior to the bankruptcy. I'm not going to ask you to say this is exactly what happened, but what does your sort of spidey sense say about what might have gone on there? It's awfully suspicious.
Obviously, it's alarming. In my job, I try to keep focused on one thing: follow the money. So we'll see. We'll investigate who received that money and what the circumstances were.
Well, thank you, and thank you again for being here. I wish you luck in tracking down all the customer funds, making sure they're returned to their rightful owners. And thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Talib, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman. Mr. Ray, I really appreciate you coming here. One of the things that kind of stood out for me is the how much FTX spent on celebrity endorsements and arena naming rights, really targeting residents like myself and others, in my community. Naming rights of the Miami Heat arena, I think you all spent like $135 million. NFT partnerships with the Golden State Warriors and Washington Capitals. I think $210 million sponsorship of the Mercedes. I don't know, it's some little long line here. Endorsements and ads with Tom Brady, Naomi, Stephen Curry, Larry David. It goes on and on. Do you know the total amount of FTX, how much they spent on sport endorsements and arena naming rights?
We don't have a full tally of that because it's just an accumulation of data.
Do you know if you all spent more on FTX versus FTX.US?
I don't have a breakdown for you, and I can't tell you how much was paid in crypto versus cash.
When you all ran that TV during the Super Bowl, I think you doubled the number of U.S. users. Is that true?
I don't have data on that.
Do you think it's financially responsible to be spending hundreds of millions of dollars on these kinds of sponsorships and quote-unquote partnerships while they were unable to cover the customer deposits?
No.
Personally, it sounds a lot like, Houston Astros playing at Enron Park. I represent the third poorest congressional district, Mr. Ray. This really impacts everyday folks like my residents who were really targeted by a lot of those ads. The crypto industry has spent millions on this marketing, and one of the things I read, which was really taken aback, and I know Madam Chair might have heard, but the Ontario teachers' pension had to write off $95 million. These are teachers. And the consequences of the crypto collapse on everyday people is something that doesn't get discussed enough. And understanding why accountability and oversight is important. That's why I really appreciate the chairwoman doing this hearing. The idea that cryptocurrency can be a solution for financial inclusion is not only laughable, it's dangerous, Mr. Ray. These quick rich kind of ads and targeting my residents, it is predatory. And quote my friend Senator Warren, it's bullshit. And let me talk about that BS a little bit. The role of exchange tokens in the crypto industry's business model, it's reported that Media held billions in illiquid FTT, and then FTTX's own exchange token. Meanwhile, FTX's own website stated that FTT was the backbone of FTX's ecosystem. I know, you're rolling your eyes. I don't know if anybody can see it. But the price of FTT traded in the high 70s over the summer, but by the start of November, it hovered, I think, around $20, and then the collapse in value triggered a so-called a bank run-like situation. And then right now, FTT is, I think, valued at just over $1 per token. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Clearly, FTX had an interest in inflating the value of their own token and it seems in hindsight that FTX was being propped up by monopoly money. Is that correct?
There may be a pattern there, yes.
Mr. Ray, have you discussed in length how FTX.com is siloed from FTX.us and FTX.us users?
Well, structurally they are. They do share a common environment, the AWS system.
Can FTX.us, users though, could they trade with FTT? Is that?
On their particular exchange, which would be the FTX.us exchange, yes.
So can you describe how FTT's collapse and value has affected FTX.us silo and how it's affected U.S. customers' residents' ability to recover their funds?
We don't have a full accounting of what crypto assets are within each silo that back up those customer accounts, and we need to accumulate the full value of the collateral, and then we'll obviously look at what type of crypto is there, and that'll be an exercise we'll have to go through.
Can you explain this whole thing around FTX's overall reliance on digital token that they control, mint, and have vested interest in manipulating the value of? That's something that I hope we dig deeper into.
I've seen stories about that and I've read quite a bit about it. We have not done a full investigation into what was going on in the marketplace relative to the various tokens. I know that's of particular interest to the regulatory community. Some of this may have played into what happened in terms of the downfall of FTX and other crypto companies. So it's certainly something we're going to investigate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Rose, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Waters, and I want to also thank Ranking Member McHenry for holding this hearing, and thank you to our witness, Mr. John Ray, for lending his expertise to this committee to examine the collapse of FTX. Mismanagement of funds, the use of complex margin and collateralization of certain digital assets, and of course, alleged fraud. The timing of the events of the last 12 hours is certainly interesting. As a recovering attorney, it makes me wonder why a prosecutor wouldn't want to potentially add lying to Congress to accompany the list of charges against Mr. Bankman-Fried. It also makes me wonder why the SEC waited until today to file its own charges. Frankly, Chair Gensler has failed at his job, and worst of all, he has failed to protect investors, which is one of the key components of the SEC's tripartite mission. Similarly, while he has been asleep at the wheel, the Democratic majority has failed to have him to testify before this committee for over 14 months, which I believe is a disservice to investors. I hope that in a few weeks that we in the new Republican majority will finally start to hold the Biden administration accountable for their failures. Now, I see my time is limited, so I will dive right into my questions. Mr. Ray, it is my understanding that FTX and Alameda hold a number of digital assets, including more than 30 billion of Tether USDT. Can you describe the efforts that you're taking to ensure that unwinding FTX in the bankruptcy proceeding won't cause unnecessary negative impacts to these digital asset markets?
At this stage, what we're doing is sequestering those assets into cold storage and securing those. We have not embarked on any sort of liquidation process related to those crypto assets. And when it comes time to look at the ultimate distribution of those assets, whether it's in cash or in kind, obviously we'll be instituting every procedure and process in place to make sure that there's no depreciation of the value of what we're distributing. Our goal is to maximize the value to customers.
Thank you. Mr. Ray, you have said that, among other things, Alameda and FTX used customer funds to make investments in a variety of businesses and ventures. Have you seen any documents suggesting that the recipients of those investments did any due diligence as to the source of funds being used by FTX and Alameda?
I've not personally seen any documentation relative to other parties' due diligence. I'm not sure we would necessarily be privy to that, but we certainly haven't found anything to date.
On the flip side, have you seen any indication as to whether adequate due diligence by FTX's institutional investors would have raised red flags?
I don't know what work they did. Obviously, they found themselves in a fairly grave position. I don't know what due diligence they may have done. It's hard for me to answer that.
Is there any indication as to whether any potential investors before the events in November took a pass on investing after taking a hard look at FTX?
Again, I'm not really privy to what due diligence people may have done. It's just not something that I've got visibility to.
So I from owning a company myself and both responding to due diligence requests and making them as we looked at companies, we kept significant records of the due diligence, both that we requested and that we responded to. Are you seeing evidence that any such records were being kept by FTX?
Not that I'm aware. Again, part of my testimony is that the company's record keeping was very minimal. Even as to some of the investments, we don't even have the complete transactional documents that govern the investment itself. So I think that speaks somewhat for your question.
And again, just to give you a chance to reiterate, you, from all of your experience throughout your career, you find that to be remarkable. I would take it.
Yeah, truly remarkable.
Well, thank you again for being with us today. And Chairman, thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member McHenry, for hosting the hearing today. And to you, Mr. Ray, thank you for being here. Mr. Ray, judging by the reaction of my colleagues, it's clear how frustrated we are, especially given your testimony where you state that you had never seen such an utter failure of corporate controls at every level of an organization. So, Mr. Ray, my question, my colleagues and I have asked repeatedly about your efforts to recover customers' assets, and you've told us today it'll take some time. But you're the expert here. Do you genuinely believe that these customers are ever going to get their money back?
Well, certainly we're working hard to cover all of the assets and to sequester those for ultimate return to customers. It's obviously a challenge. It's a massive loss. It's very speculative right now what that recovery will be. It's too early to tell what the ultimate recovery will be to each particular customer. At some point, we'll obviously know that, and we hope, obviously, to maximize that.
Well, okay, that doesn't sound like you really think they're going to get their money back. But let me Do you think that some of the losses suffered by these investors are simply a result of the nature of investment and risk-taking in the market, or was this fraud?
Well, certainly, I think the way the company operated lended itself to, materially risky losses, positions. Clearly a better run company would have had controls and procedures in place to avoid losses.
Okay, thank you, sir. Let me revisit the quote from your testimony. I want you to touch on the quality of FTX's bookkeeping. Was there a discrepancy between what it disclosed to its investors versus what was going on in the company internally? And can you provide an update on your efforts to fill those gaps?
Right. Well, the quality of the record keeping was very poor in the company. We still don't have complete financial statements for every one of the entities. We're going back and rebuilding those right now. Our process is to have a beginning entry with our assets and cash and our liabilities, and we'll do that on an entity by entity basis. In the coming months, through the bankruptcy process, there'll be disclosures about the financial status of every one of the entities, but that's a process that we'll build out over the next 4 months.
So in your testimony, you discussed the existence of a computer infrastructure that gave senior management personal access to customer funds and lacked security controls. So can you describe examples of the misuse of customer funds that took place as a result of these vulnerabilities?
Well, the main misuse is just simply taking customer funds and using it for other purposes. I mean, obviously, there's investments made, payments made, expenditures that were made with customer funds, and then obviously trading that occurred that caused losses that ultimately harmed the customer.
All right, thank you, sir. Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Stile, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Ray, for being here. There's a lot of questions about early stage due diligence, about why the indictment and the timing of that indictment by justice. But I think as policymakers, we're here to understand the FTX collapse and what can be done to prevent a future fraud like this from ever occurring again, where individuals lost their money. It's complicated by the fact that FTX is domiciled in a foreign jurisdiction, and by all indications, Mr. Bankman-Fried is also in a foreign jurisdiction at this time. And so we should ask ourselves tough questions as to why a company like FTX would choose to set itself up in the Bahamas rather than the United States in the first place. I think that's a question for Congress. And also, we can't lose sight of the fact that millions of Americans lost money in this. I'm outraged. I think you're outraged. The American people should be outraged. Let me dive in. A day after FTX filed for bankruptcy, multiple outlets reported that there was a hack or a potential theft. You have stated unauthorized access to certain assets occurred and that the company was in touch with law enforcement officials and regulators. Have you determined whether, in fact, assets were moved out after the bankruptcy?
Yes, clearly there was assets moved out after the bankruptcy.
And do you know whether or not that was an actual hack, or was this done, as has been reported, at the direction of the Bahamian authorities?
It was both.
It was both. And so some was done as a result of a hack, some was done as a result of the request of the Bahamian authorities.
Yes, that's right.
And do you have indication as to why the Bahamian authorities made that request?
Well, it wasn't a request. They just took it.
The Bahamian authorities took the funds that were at FTX
Yes.
through their own action. Was no action required by FTX employees? Maybe you could provide just a little color.
They were aided by the ex-employees, yes.
They were aided by former employees of FTX.
Yes, Mr. Wang and Mr. Fried.
Is it in the eyes of the Bahamian authorities did this to protect clients and creditors? Do you have insight into the motivation behind this action?
Unlike the Chapter 11 process, there's no transparency in the process in the Bahamians, and we've repeatedly asked them for clarity about what they've been doing, and we've been shut down on that.
So from you've requested insight as to why this was done from the Bahamian authorities, and the Bahamian authorities, their reply to you was that they did not reply, or they replied and it was unsatisfactory?
They put out statements that it was in the interest of Bahamian creditors, although our view is that it violated the automatic stay in bankruptcy.
And so you have questions that still remain unanswered by the Bahamian authorities that would shed additional light into your investigation if that information was provided?
Yes.
Do you believe that at that time Mr. Bankman-Fried was attempting to undermine Chapter 11 cases by expanding the scope, by moving assets to accounts under the control of the Bahamian authorities?
It appears so.
So it appears that he may be working to undermine the scope of federal bankruptcy, U.S. federal bankruptcy law.
That's what it appears, yes.
And so then do you still believe that the Chapter 15 case should be consolidated in the Delaware Bankruptcy Court?
No, I do not think so.
What do you think should be, what do you think would be the best course of action?
They have a liquidation proceeding relative to FTS Digital Markets. They filed that proceeding there. That is their proceeding. We think the Chapter 11 process is the only open, transparent process that gives visibility to customers of what happened and when they're going to get their money and how they're going to get their money. The process in the Bahamian Islands is not a transparent process. We have opened up the ability to share everything that we have with the Bahamian government, similar to how we share with other liquidators around the world. Not only in this case, in other cases, it's meant to be a very cooperative situation. The pushback that we've gotten is sort of extraordinary in the context of bankruptcy. It raises questions. It seems irregular to me. There's lots of questions on our part, and obviously we're investigating it.
I appreciate your candor on that point. I think that's a really important point that we look at. And again, one of my concerns is we look at overall crypto policy, shifting away from this specific bankruptcy, is that we have a large number of crypto companies that have chosen to domicile outside the United States rather than inside the United States, and a lack of a regulatory framework inside the United States. My concern is that's moving people to be offshore. And when they're offshore, when a fraud like this occurs, it's to the detriment of Americans who've placed their money in trust of a company like FTX. I appreciate you being here, cognizant of my time. I yield back.
The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, who is also the chair of the Task Force on Financial Technology, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Ray. I appreciate your patience with us today and your testimony. Recently, we received a leaked copy of Mr. Bankman-Fried's intended testimony. Apparently, it was leaked to Forbes. Basically, he continues to allege that this was all an accident, that was unintentional on his part, that he was unaware of his company's, various companies' activities. However, as my colleagues have pointed out previously, this structuring, as you have said, of these 4 silos of companies, the location in the Bahamas indicates a deliberate attempt to avoid U.S. jurisdiction and U.S. security laws. So in our conversations with Mr. Gensler of the SEC last week, he indicated that there are laws in place that would have protected investors and customers had Mr. Bankman-Fried decided to register his offshore operations here in the United States. Is that your understanding?
I'm not familiar with the regulations he's speaking to. Obviously there was an absence of regulation relative to these operations, so clearly any regulation would have helped.
The Southern District of New York also unsealed its criminal indictment this morning, which alleges that Mr. Bankman-Fried lied to investors. He now faces about 8 counts, including wire fraud on customers and lenders and conspiring to defraud the U.S. and violate campaign finance laws. Do you have any information that would countervail those charges? Is there anything that you've seen in the way that Mr. Bankman-Fried structured this company, or in any way that he tried to comply with U.S. securities law in your investigation so far?
I mean, we've certainly made all of our information available to the regulators and the enforcement agencies, and obviously they're seeing what we're seeing.
What I'm trying to get at is that while Mr. Bankman-Fried continues to say this was an accident, it appears to me at every step of the way that that his acts were intentional, they were willful, and these were conscious decisions made by him in structuring his company as he did.
I don't know what his intent was. I certainly know what the results were, and they're disastrous, obviously, for customers.
I realize that only, well, at least so far, the reports say that only about 2% of the people defrauded in this, in the FTX collapse, were from the United States. Is that correct?
You know, I don't know how they're calculating that number. Is that on a customer basis, a value basis? It's hard to comment on it. We do know that the U.S. investors were on the U.S. exchange, and the relative losses there are a fraction. But it's too early to tell exactly how much those losses are in either silo. There is a general truth to the statement that the U.S. will suffer, that particular exchange will suffer less than the .com exchange, purely because of the siphoning off of cash and assets from .com over to Alameda.
There also seem to be, despite the structural differences between these different operations, FTX.com, FTX US, there is, without a doubt, a barrage of advertisements, endorsements, especially in the minority communities where Bankman-Fried admitted that he was trying to supposedly bank the unbanked with access to FTX. Is that how the U.S. citizens were sort of swept up into this? Do you have any indication that that was the process? They do heavily. There's a lot of hype around crypto. There were hundreds of millions of dollars were spent on advertising to U.S. citizens on FTX. I'm just wondering if that was what drew some of these victims into this disaster.
I don't have a professional view of that. I think your own observations will guide you there.
Okay. Well, my time has expired. Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the ranking member for hosting this important hearing at an extraordinary time in the cause of this case. So, Mr. Ray, I want to just make sure we set the stage, which is that no matter what, the failure, the fraud, the infliction of pain on people is extraordinarily real, as intriguing, as disastrous as the events leading up to the filings of bankruptcy are. And of course, you have the task of trying to recapture the assets and protect them and transparently convey them back to folks as best as possible. So all that is outrageous. I'd like to focus my time a little bit on what happened on the 11th and the 12th of November. You say in your testimony, I'm going to cite both your testimony and the declaration of the filing yesterday in court, that you accepted the position of Chief Executive Officer for FTX Group in the early morning hours of November the 11th and quickly realized bankruptcy filing was necessary, which began that day. You also say that as the cases were filed, debtors and their representatives worked tirelessly through the night to secure assets. You then go on in this yesterday's pleading, trying to block what the other liquidator was trying to do, to say that during this period, on the 11th and the 12th, as best I can build this, information emerged that debtor systems and assets were accessed from at least 2 sources. What are those 2 sources?
There was two situations going on. One is there was a hacking by a third party. We are tracing that hacking, using our own cyber teams, plus we're being assisted by the government in tracking the ultimate, location of those crypto assets. And the other thing that happened at the same time was that, aided with resources of our former management, the Bahamian government took control of certain crypto assets.
Bahamian Commission
Yes.
instructed Misters Bankman-Fried and Wang to mint, what does that mean, to mint a substantial number of new tokens and transfer hundreds of millions of dollars worth of these new tokens to cold storage for their benefit.
So what that refers to is that it's mentioning the FTT, which is
Sorry guys, I'm gonna have to end this stream
coin
here because
created
I've
by
got
the
another
company.
call. And I didn't
Could
expect
literally
this to
be
going on
minted. You
for
could create new money with it.
almost 4 hours.
And so in that process,
I'll put a link to
FTT
where
was
you can continue
transferred
watching the stream.